Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And here we are. We're back for yet another edition, the second episode of 2023's Overlapping Dialogue. Episode 68. Any new thoughts or ideas or impressions about what 2023 has been so far for you, Levi?
No, people get so wrapped up in years as a whole concept, and all people do is complain about years at the end of years to the point where I just don't.
Or like somebody has a slightly inconvenient thing happen. Oh my God, cancel 2023.
Yeah, it's like
how about you grow up?
Oh no, like somebody cut me off in the McDonald's parking lot. Oh my God, 2023 is over.
It's a
just
disaster.
Like, yeah, get over yourself. I don't know. I don't really care.
Get over it. Yeah, there you go. So,
but
our double feature today is, again, we talked about this last episode. Like, we're not really sure how we came to the conclusion to put these movies together.
Yeah.
I think they're both fine films in their own ways, and I think for me, they both reached the ceilings of their success, what they're both trying to do for me personally, which is The Misfits from 1961 and Dunston Checks In from 1996. Now, again, both of these movies in their own ways are about, how we as men and women must, try to put a tamper or try to bottle up those animalistic urges, animalistic cravings that we try our best as humans to put on brave faces for the world, but oftentimes and sometimes those masks fall short and reveal the true animal nature of who we are.
You find a pongo pygmaeus and you're like, wow.
You're like, wow.
I want to say, first of all, that I went into this double feature having seen neither of these two movies, thinking I would prefer one over the other. That was not the case. Let me just go ahead and say. Not that the other is not better, by the way, clearly, but we'll get to that later. But yeah, very big surprise for me that I don't regret. But,
and I think, in their own way, like, and on a non-serious note, because this podcast is all about being serious and non-serious as often as we can. That, I think more than anything, these movies just, sometimes we like to watch things that really contextually go hand in hand, but also I feel like our taste on this podcast has been enough evident that we also just like all kinds of crazy different things, and that even pairing two movies like this together are their own way to say, again, in all seriousness, even though I said not serious, whatever, we're blurring the lines as these movies both do, that cinema is such a broad art form that you can kind of have like as much fun and also as thought-provoking, a medium as it is, that there's just such variety.
Yeah.
And these two movies represent a great variety of, again, really, I think, well-made and entertaining movies in very different ways.
Yeah.
And that, this pairing in many ways represents the capacity for cinema to be all things for all people. Not the same works, but different works, so...
I like all the contextualizing you have successfully attempted to give this insane double feature, because it's nothing. They could be no more different Like, literally the only more different they could be is if they were in another language.
Yeah.
Like, or one was animated. Other than that,
Yeah.
like, it's literally, like, what is even this?
Yeah.
So.
Only 35 years removed from each other, but wholly different worlds in
Yeah.
which they both occupy.
Because they're both a lot about sex, also.
Yes.
That's another thing that's similar
Yes.
about them is, like... Because I was thinking, oh, well, the only thing that'd be different is if, like, the Misfits were, like, way, like, more extreme of a movie or something. Then I was thinking, I don't know, Dunston Checks In is about as raunchy and
as a PG
as can
movie's ever
possibly
been.
be. Yeah, so more so even than the Misfits. So it really has Marilyn Monroe in it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. This one has an ape.
So
An orangutan.
a pongo pygmaeus, as
Right.
it turns out. But before we get into all that nonsense, we gotta pull up a chair, pull up a stool, get that old wooden spoon
And prepare your stool.
for the Blue Plate special.
Hi, Audrey.
Mama, have a cup of coffee, please.
Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who ordered the large pepperoni? Coming up!
Your stool will be not here because it'll be a specimen.
There you go. So
Because they're going to want to study it after this one.
So this is Blue Plate special. We're going to be talking about two new releases.
Two
And
also very different movies.
Yes,
That could make an interesting double
both
feature.
fulfilling in their own ways as well. I gotta say, this is two of the strongest January new releases back to back I've seen in a while. In terms of because usually January is a hodgepodge of releases. It's usually
it's all part of the menu.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
it's
but-
like usually holdovers.
Why did the menu not come out in January, by the way?
I don't know.
Like, was it trying to do this whole, like, Oscar bait crap or something? Or, like, even try to... but it's... and I'm saying there's no
I think it's
reason
trying to be like
for
a
it
fall thriller.
There's
not
no
exactly
reason for it to have, though, because it literally... No one's going to think that of it. It's like, no, you might as well just release
I
that
think
earlier in the
less
year.
that than it is just like a fall thriller almost. Like, like David Fincher puts out movies oftentimes in October, November, while his movies in more recent decades have tried to be a little bit more on the Oscar bait or award-worthy side.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
even just
yeah.
something like Gone Girl is just like, just a pure fun, pretty great thriller. that
Yeah,
came
like
out,
how A
that
Man
thing.
Called Otto just came out, and that should have been in that menu spot instead, right? I mean,
But we're going to be talking today about, again, two new releases. And again, these are releases that are not like, they were supposed to be awards movies at the end of the
Right.
year. No, these are movies that are very clearly meant to kind of exist in the January
to be
space.
movies.
Right, just to be new releases that don't have any real awards aspirations,
Right.
Plane, the newest Gerard Butler actioner, and Skinamarink, which is a new horror movie, which probably talking about a little bit more than Plane, but we'll see. Plane, I mean, it's right there.
Yeah.
The title tells you everything you need to know. Now, as far as an action star, Gerard Butler's someone that I'm kind of touch and go on.
Yeah, because sometimes I really like him in something, but he's not somebody I think a lot about. Like, I'll see him in a movie like Den of Thieves, for example, which we really love, but he's not normally the first thing I think of about Den of Thieves. I normally think of like 50 Cent or like that other guy who's like the main bad guy in it.
Pablo Schreiber?
Yeah, Pablo Schreiber,
Yeah.
I normally think of him first, honestly, and then Gerard Butler, I'm like, yeah, he's in that, whatever.
Or even, what's Ice Cube's son?
Yeah.
who's in
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah, and then also, O'Shea Jackson Jr., I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in that too. So, yeah, normally I'm not going to think of Gerard Butler
I do think of
first,
his
but-
name, though, in the movie Big Nick.
Yes, that is true, yeah.
Waiting on that Den of Thieves sequel, by the way.
Now, that movie, never forget, is 140 minutes long. Trying to be the heat of its day.
Yeah.
We totally love Den of Thieves.
Oh, yeah.
And if you haven't seen Den of Thieves, you need to see it immediately. Now, is it good? I mean, yes.
Yeah, I would
actually,
say it's good,
barely. I mean, it's It is what it is. Funny thing about that movie, of course, is that it was supposed to be in like L.A., but was filmed all in Atlanta. You can tell, and it's very clear too.
Yeah, and we've never
yeah.
been to Los Angeles, but as having seen plenty of movies set in Los Angeles, even from afar, we were like,
and also having even seen enough movies in Atlanta too.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and just knowing about Atlanta in general.
Right.
Yeah.
So Gerard Butler, I mean, I feel like, you know,
we kind of talked about
his
Tennessee for a while there,
success
but
is kind of sorta to me tied to like the rise of like the British Isles action star, like in terms of like Liam Neeson or Jason Statham, like as far as a certain like, you know, ho hum action star again that's has a kind of a, if not exactly British temperament from the British Isles, that kind of, not exactly American, but still in a lot of
which is
American
weird for Den of
movies.
Thieves because he's very clearly an American.
Well,
in
yeah,
that,
that's
with with a massive divorce proceedings going on.
This one steers very directly into the fact that he's from Scotland,
which is weird because he started as like being in 300. That was kind of his big breakout project for the most part. I mean, he'd been in things before that, but that's kind of weird to think that he would come out of that and then, like, say, become that. I mean, all those Olympus Has Fallen, White House Has Fallen, whatever all those movies are. Yeah. Like, all of those movies are pretty big, actually. Yeah. And then he was in Greenland also, which I always get confused with Green Zone, but, you know.
He's got his own filmography page.
Yeah, let's see what's going on here.
300 was the first thing I remember seeing him in. I remember when he was blown up. He isn't like the lead in Rock and Rolla. Yeah. Guy Ritchie movie I quite like.
How to Train Your Dragon. So yeah, I guess he's been in some of those.
Legend of the Bone Napper Dragon. Well, that's tied to that, I think. How to Train Your Dragon stuff. Machine Gun Preacher, which was, I know, a movie our cousin
I forgot
Philip
about
and I
that.
always wanted to see, but I don't think ever did.
Yeah, that's
he does play Leprechaun 1 and 2
in movie 43. Yeah.
There you go. I think I've seen Olympus Has Fallen and London Has Fallen. White House Down is like the other one that's got Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum in it.
Oh, okay.
So that was like the one that came out around the same time, and they look like they're basically the same movie. I will say Olympus Has Fallen, like, that is a little bit more the grittier version. That's got Aaron Eckhart and Morgan Freeman. I think Roland Emmerich did the White House Down, and that has a little bit more of a studio heft to it. Yeah. And so Olympus Has Fallen is a little bit more the flying by the seat of its pants one. Yeah. London Has Fallen, I remember also liking for what it was. Geostorm. I don't think I saw that. No, I don't think I did. There's something about it made me think, maybe I did. Angel Has Fallen, the third one. I don't think I've seen that one. Yeah. Cop Shop. What a great name.
Man. I gotta see that.
Yeah. Frank Grillo's also in that. Let me just read just real quick what this is about. Small town police station that becomes the battleground between a hitman, a novice police officer, and a con artist.
I gotta see that like now. Yeah, the
Last Seen Alive was a movie he was in last year too, by the way. Kandahar is an upcoming action thriller he's going to be in. Also, it says he produced this movie, I think, right?
Yes.
I think he started to get into producing. Well, it actually says he's produced quite a bit of movies. I didn't know that, really. Law Abiding Citizen, that came out in 2009. I remember like that being a kind of divisive movie directed by F. Gary Gray that certain people really liked and other people thought was idiotic. I've not seen it, so I don't know.
Gods of Egypt he was also in. I forgot that movie.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I don't think, right?
I think we're better off.
Yeah. I got that in
Exodus, Gods and Kings. No, Gods of Egypt was that, like, basically Clash of the Titans, but like Egyptian mythology.
So again, Gerard Butler. Anyway, I mean, I'm kind of, it's hit or miss. I mean, some of his stuff I like.
I mean, are you pausing for dramatic effect?
I do. He is actually memorable to me in Den of Thieves. Is like really selling himself out to what that whole movie and that character. So he's someone I generally like. I mean, I don't go out and see every one of his movies, but as far as action movies go, Gerard Butler movie, maybe it depends what it is,
But what's interesting about this movie, I'll say, his character, what I actually liked about his character in this, is that, he was in the RAF. He's like a pilot, obviously, for the plane. And just to briefly describe what the movie's about.
Let me just read it real quick here. It says, film centers around a pilot, Butler, allying with a prisoner to save his passengers from hostile territory they landed in for an emergency landing.
Yeah, so basically the plane goes down.
struck by lightning, I think.
Well, they go through like a whole storm because they're trying to save money or whatever. Anyway, and there's this guy on board who's like, his whole backstory was so vague. It was
Mike Coulter,
yes, who played Luke Cage. Yeah, he's basically was like wrongly accused of some like murder or something. Yeah, or maybe even did it. I don't know. And then like went into the French Foreign Legion to like escape or whatever, and like became this really good, like, because I think he was actually in the military before that or something too in America, and then became part of that and has basically been on the run. Anyway, they crash land in like this Filipino island kind of chain, and there's all these like militias there and stuff, and they're wanting to basically kidnap the people and sell them for ransom, more or less, and it's about them trying.
And then meanwhile, the like airline is trying to,
which is some of my favorite stuff in the movie. Like I kind of wanted to see a little more of that personally, just because I liked all the actors that were involved with that. But yeah, what's funny about all this though to me is that his character, the Gerard Butler character, he was in the RAF and he's like had a little bit of military experience, but like overall was pretty like non-combatant for the most part, but had like gotten into this fight with and then there's all this backstory about his wife died and he's
trying to get home to see his daughter for New Year's.
Right. And
random New Year's movie.
Yeah, it's pretty random. It's like everybody's like Happy New Year all the time. Like, what a New Year it is. But yeah, and like but that he had gotten it. They actually show a part of this movie where he had like gotten in an altercation with an unruly passenger, and that's why he's flying all these crappy flights. But anyway, what I liked about his character though is he wasn't this like hyper experienced combat veteran, master or veteran or whatever, that he has to kind of have the help of this felon essentially,
which of course has the whole question: should we uncuff him and have him help us out, or is he really dangerous? And a lot of the passengers clearly are categorize him as a very dangerous.
But yeah, this is actually a really breezy movie. Like I feel like it actually not as much happens as you would think.
Doesn't overstay its welcome.
No, and it's made on the cheap. I kind of talked about this in my brief review, but you could tell this movie was made very cheaply, actually, which I'm fine with. I don't have a problem with that. But there's parts where also there's just like an awkwardness to things that happens with a movie like this that's made really cheap. Like there's the whole scene when the movie starts. There's like a lot of random import put into. All right, we need to do our flight checklist, and then they stand around, sip coffee, and say, all right, bring them on. And it's like a scene that takes way too long to happen, and then there's all these shots of the people on the plane getting on. Like, oh, we're really going to get to know these people, and for the most part, we never really do.
I mean, there's the one guy, the bald guy that gets on, who's like, he's going to be the annoying passenger, but he's not even in it as much as you think.
And then there's the guy who's like, that later's like, I can drive anything. It's like such a random statement, by the way, but it shows some about that guy. So some of the people do have things to contribute, but there's just a lot of random import given at the beginning to these characters are going to go through hell together. And it's like, but for the most part, then we just focus on Butler and Coulter and then the co-pilot guy, which is fine, but the whole movie just feels actually randomly weirder than you would think. It has a lot of alternative choices that you wouldn't expect, which makes it kind of more interesting, I think, and more effective, is that it's just a really good, fine, little action movie that saves most of its action for the end, for the most part. And some of the CGI sequences of the plane flying are pretty ridiculous, and they have these, like, jump zooms and stuff, like, and stuff that like Zack Snyder's real into, and so it's all pretty weird. It's a really weird movie, actually. So let me just read a little bit about the production, which is actually randomly fascinating. It says in November 2019, Lionsgate Films acquired the distribution rights to the film, but in November 2020, it abandoned the project after failing to obtain production insurance that would cover a COVID-19 outbreak, as the studio did not want to risk the film's original $50 million budget. It says now the budget was somewhere between $20 to $25 million, which I think, again, you can tell it's a lower budget, but it wears it well in terms of having to run that low. It's fine, but you can tell that there's more that there's supposed to be, and that's just not there.
And Solstice Studios acquired the rights to the film. However, in May 2021, Lionsgate reacquired the rights to The Plane in what Andreas Wiseman from Deadline Hollywood described as, quote, case of high-profile Hollywood volleyball. So there's just like all this random, will this studio make it? Will that studio make it? And then it's just kind of funny for a movie that is just, everybody knows what it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be this. It's just going to be a pretty much easy, breezy, light, let's make what money we can and move on action movie.
Yeah.
Which just shows you how Hollywood works, that even something like this has to go through all these hoops and jump through them. Again, we didn't expect much from this, but had a really good time with it.
Yeah.
Again, I think the key to going into it is not to expect, something that's even all that especially stylish. I feel like a movie like this wears its professionalism and its ho-humness, to use the phrase I used earlier, on its sleeve, and it's just about, you kind of know what you're getting going into this.
Yeah.
And really it's just about the extent to which it executes, and I would say it executes really on every front.
Yeah.
We can talk a little bit about the villains of this too.
Yeah.
They're again basically these Filipino militiamen.
Yeah.
And I think I'd seen Ehrlich say this in his Letterboxd review, which was partially some of his actual IndieWire review, but something along the lines of like, this feels ripped straight out of the 80s in many ways. I mean, they're just vague brown people, and they don't really have much personality or any real motivation other than, well, we're gonna like hold you captive and prisoner and use you as a hostage and sell you back and maybe just kill you anyways. And and then, I mean, kind of the fourth act, post credits, is so breezy. It's kind of surprisingly wraps itself up. I'd say, so
there's not that
the
big
plane
of a,
gets to
turned out
working.
they're not that big of a threat.
Yeah,
I mean,
the
now
plane
of course,
gets to working.
Yeah.
The mercenaries that the airline company
I'm
hires.
talk a little bit about them in a minute because
find them, get them pretty quickly.
No losses
and then,
whatsoever on their part.
Yeah, and then not to spoil too much, but I'd say the villain gets a pretty nice, great villain death involving. Go ahead and spoil it.
The landing
gear blows his head apart basically as it's launching. You don't really see it, but you know what grisly thing happens.
Yeah.
Again, what was it you had to say about just kind of?
Well,
how
I want to start just a little bit further up, and I really love the guy in the movie who's like their fixer guy, who I've seen in a couple things but can't remember him. They're like guy that the airline brings in to basically negotiate the whole thing and figure out what they're going to do. And he's like, oh, we're hiring these mercenaries. And it's just hilarious because it's like these mercenaries that just do this type of job all the time, I guess.
Right.
But it's like, where do they come from exactly? Like, what's their whole deal?
Yeah.
What was so funny to me, too, is that they're carrying the money that they made from the whole thing on their person.
Right.
And that spoiler at the end is how the felon fugitive guy gets away with that money.
And then there's never like a scene that cuts back to showing, oh, he got away.
No, it's
definitely.
just like, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, yeah. But yeah, just like.
Hopefully there's a sequel called Moneybag. It's just like about.
Money Plane?
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll see a guy effing an alligator. Money Plane. But Money Plane. Now there's a movie.
That movie should have been way better than
Feels like that's like it wanted to be, but didn't even know something like Bullet Train,
right?
Like a version of something like that, but wasn't.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what were we doing there?
Yeah.
With Money Plane? I don't know. Because I felt like it was sold on the scene of Kelsey Grammer saying, if you want to bet on a guy effing an alligator, Money Plane.
Money Plane.
And it's like, and then that, but yeah, I saw that, and then I saw the rest of the movie, and it was like, yeah, okay.
So what?
Now, his death in the movie was really great, where he was just like, shoot. That was funny. But anyway, that's hard to believe. That's been almost 3 years ago, like this summer. That's crazy.
Wild.
Anyway, they keep all their money on their person, and he just gets away with it. And then they're kind of mad about it, but they don't seem that mad either, the mercenaries. They just kind of give up on it, and they're like, whatever. But yeah, like literally the most effective mercenary team of all time. They literally go in, kill all the people. Like I said this in my review too, is like the sniper for them, who had this massive Barrett 50 cal sniper rifle, just blasting through entire vehicles and hitting people, just like literally without any thought. It's just like, wow. Yeah. So just the effectiveness of all that was kind of funny to me, and just such a weird.
It's kind of like the movie just looked at the clock and was like, yeah, we kind of just got to wrap it up, and whatever, right? You know, it did feel like you said that it, you know, the budget could have been higher, and that like you could kind of feel the. Because they had the whole climax. You know? The whole climax of the movie occurred in the same place as earlier in the movie that most of it happened. I mean, you can tell they had this one kind of set that they want to keep using with the plane. And so, yeah. But it's rare that you see an action movie like this with so many corners cut like that. I mean, there's all kinds of other action movies that do similar things that are like, you know, direct to video and stuff like that. Yeah. But this is, an interesting instance where it's like, no, it has a pretty big enough pedigree, but you can tell they just didn't get that full amount of money they wanted. But yeah. But again, I think we would agree that for what it is, not the biggest expectation. Yeah, that was another thing. We saw it on Thursday night. So right when it was opening, because we just had to be there for the plane opening. Or plane, excuse me, not the plane.
That's like how we went to go see American Carol on opening day. Yeah.
One day we'll get into that in more detail.
We
need to rewatch it, honestly.
I don't feel that we need to. I'm going to be honest with you. I have nothing to say about American Carol. That's literally... I actually probably would have a lot, but... Yeah. I just like slapping you, as Bill O'Reilly wants to. But Bill O'Reilly sucks. Yeah.
But, I mean, you know, it doesn't have the biggest expectations it's shooting your way, but lands the plane, no pun intended, you know, and just, it is what it is. And so you know if you're going to like this kind of movie or not.
Yeah, one thing I like about the movie is all the just Gerard Butlerisms in the movie of like, we're flying in the blind, do you copy? Like, you know, like trying to sound like friggin' Soap McTavish or something, like, which, you know, both Scots, I guess. Yeah. But just a lot of kind of funny moments of him in the movie too, and so it's definitely worth going out to see. I think if not, it would be a really great red box experience. Yes. If nothing else, I think
I agree with that. So again, Plane in theaters currently.
We need to mention that you said it would have been a better title.
Oh yeah, Rest in Philippines. I think would have been the better title. You know, just because why not? Yeah. You know,
Plane.
Just I remember like the title reveal of because people were like sharing the trailer on Twitter like a month or two ago or whatever, and it was like you won't believe the title reveal. And it's just like, okay, a little Gerard Butler action movie, okay, and then that like last like title
and it
card
fades in too.
Like, Plane.
Yeah, Plane.
Rest in Philippines I think would have worked better, but whatever.
But
I think Plane. You know, again, as I said, you know if you're going to like something like this or not. And again, you could have made this same movie but made a way dumber version of it. Yeah. And so I think it's like, oh yeah, checks the box.
Third degree, Plane.
So there you go.
That's going to take too long to explain, so I'm going to move on.
Plane, currently in theaters. Also currently in theaters is Skinamarink, which is a Canadian experimental horror film. I'll just read you briefly what it's directed by a man named Kyle Edward Ball. This is his feature directorial debut. Film follows two children who wake up during the night to discover that they cannot find their father and that the windows, doors, and other objects in their home are disappearing. So this movie had, I think there were some short films that were made over the last several years that were almost a proof of concept for Ball about what this was maybe going to be, and that he even, like, I think it was either on YouTube or Reddit, somewhere online, had even fielded various prompts to people, like, what were some of your childhood nightmares or childhood fears? Yeah. And kind of wrote, those into some of the things in this. Yeah. This movie already had a huge buzz about how different and terrifying it was, and you get horror movies like this every few years that have that buzz about them. For you going into it, what were your expectations of what this were going to be, and how were they realized?
Well, I had seen the trailer for the movie, which I don't think you had. And
no, I hadn't.
Had an idea of what it was going to be because of just by the trailers being able to see that it's interesting the way you read the summary, but I think that simplifies the movie far too much and makes people think it's going to be even more conventional. Yeah. This is one of the most experimental movies I've ever seen in a theater, I think. Very easily.
Especially in a multiplex.
Yes. I mean, because, like, to go see this at, like, some other arts theater in, like, Asheville or Charlotte or somewhere would make sense, or Durham or wherever. But yeah, to see this at like the AMC at like a 5 o'clock on a Friday is just weird. But yeah, and I don't say that lightly. It's an extremely experimental movie. That never on screen is a person's face shown, like, ever. And then in one instance when it is, it's like not exactly. Let's
just say that we'll probably talk about this movie in general terms, but as our discussion moves along, we might go into spoiler territory.
But let's just say that it could be described by Joe Pesci when he once said, "And I take your eyes," like, because I'm a wise guy. But that most of the movie is shot in these. What would be the weirdest shot in any other movie is every single shot in this movie, basically, where it's of all these like incredibly, almost cinema verite, weird like framings and blockings. And I think he shot it in his own like childhood home.
And a lot of it is, I feel like I was less conscious of this in the moment than I was thinking back about it later. A lot of it is like of ceilings or of like corners of rooms in the ceilings. And a lot of it is framed low. Yeah. Almost like you're a child looking up at these kind of weird, askewed, extreme angles. It gives you that feeling while you're watching it.
Yeah.
It almost feels like a version of VR cinema without the VR headset.
Right. Yeah. And like I'm about halfway through my review of it, but I've compared it a lot to and everybody's been comparing it to these creepypastas and these like internet horror, basically, just as a whole concept, which is interesting because I've said that it is that, but it's also very much a vintage kind of approximation of 70s horror and 90s horror.
Yeah, the movie itself is set in 1995, I believe it says, a title card at the beginning.
Right. But at the same time, it's like all these things, yet none of them. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's incredibly original. I mean, he's said
the story itself is not.
His influences are like, Stan Brakhage, David Lynch. I thought a lot about the movie Wavelength while I was watching it, which I haven't seen, but is that which he said was an inspiration also, but I was thinking about that while I was watching it. But so there's a lot of these experimental movies that have been an influence, but to see something like this get released like this, I haven't ever seen anything like that before.
To me, it's been drawing comparisons to a lot of things like Paranormal Activity or the Blair Witch Project, which, what I found the most exciting thing about this movie, and I tweeted about this too, was that it feels as though it's the influence or evolution of found footage horror aesthetic without the conceit of the characters shooting in a found footage way. So it's like, it's very reminiscent of how those movies look, but again, it's not the characters shooting footage. It's just putting you in their, mind spaces, or like making you feel like you're honestly the kids themselves walking through some of these rooms.
Well, there are a lot of first-person shots. And like there are parts where there's kind of, like I said, they're all also, when we see them, it's usually from their waist down, or only their silhouette, or their body from behind. It's like never their face is actually totally shown at all of anyone in the whole movie. Even the final shot of the movie is like, I won't say exactly right now, maybe we'll talk about it later, is one of the weirdest endings to any movie I've ever seen, and one of the most shocking and downright hilarious in its own way.
After the fact, in the
moment, it's like, and then when you think about it, you're like, wow, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Kind of like the ending of Enemy, but not in the shock factor of it, but of just like, wow, that's the way you're going to end this movie, is like that.
So we've talked about the kind of roundabout way, the aesthetic. Did you, quote, like this movie, or what are its strengths and weaknesses for you?
I did, for the most part. I mean, I think that there's a certain arrogance to the movie, and I happened upon intro that Kyle Edward Ball did for some film festival that he showed this at, talking about it, and he just seems like an incredibly arrogant individual the way he was talking, and I don't know, but and you can tell from the movie that it is very meticulous and specific, and which is weird.
It's
for a movie
aspiring to be
right.
something truly groundbreaking,
yes.
something different.
And it is, I think, but he knows that it is, and
Yeah.
so he revels in that through the movie. You can tell.
Yeah.
But that but what was funny in the actual video, he was like, "Go home at night, and I guarantee that you will have trouble going to sleep, guaranteed." And I was like, nope, not the case for me, because I didn't really find the movie actually to be that terrifying. I mean, for a movie that nothing happens throughout, it's not that scary. I mean, but I get why people feel that way about it. But as someone who is normally easily scared by movies like this, I, for the most part, was not. But and that doesn't matter because I still like the movie fine enough. But I think the vibe is what people get out of that. And there's this whole, that whole kind of lo-fi aesthetic that's been a big thing the last 10 years. Is like I said, it all comes out of this
mumblecore,
this whole internet horror and internet culture has been such a big influence on this, which I think is so strange considering how much the internet has rotted the attention spans of everyone. I think it's interesting that a movie like this could come out and people would go see. But I wasn't. I mean,
did the quote trick of the movie wear off for you after a certain point?
I think it did at certain points. I think that, but every second you never knew when something would happen.
Right.
So there was this continuous dread where I wasn't exactly bored.
Yeah.
Because the movie tricked me time and again into like, oh, something's going to happen, and then it doesn't, or and then something does, and then you're like, oh, okay, so now I've got to be on guard again about this. I feel like seeing it multiple times, it would really wear off. Maybe, I don't know, but I'll eventually rewatch it. But, just as a whole experience like that, I think I enjoyed it, but I find that it can wear itself out eventually. And like I said, you can tell he knows how big this is, and I'm doing this, and that you can kind of get from the movie also, I think, in a way. But and then of course in the end it kind of does this whole, because I was able to follow the vagueness of it for the most part. But we were talking about this. Horror movies always get this excuse to be vague in the end and be like, oh, but what really happened? And like the whole narrative just totally breaks down. Like they're trying to be Gravity's Rainbow or something. And it's just like every horror movie does that now, where it's like, oh, nothing makes sense anymore. And I'm like,
we've talked about post-horror a little bit in the past.
Like, but I don't know. Literally, when movies do that, especially a movie like this, which already doesn't have characters, basically, they're not actual. I put characters in quotes in my review so far. I'm like, these are not real people to me. Like, I feel the dread that they feel, but I do not feel for them as characters
for me,
because they don't exist in my estimation of the movie. They are not real.
I think for me,
but
I really think a lot of the movie, I would give it like, say, 4 out of 5 stars. And I think the quote trick of it does wear off after a while, but it's really, and you kind of feel it in the moment of the movie, but as you said, it keeps you on guard enough that for me, there's always that what's next, what's happening. Now, again, this isn't a traditional like jump scare by this beat, by this beat, by this beat kind of horror movie.
Yeah.
I would say, frankly, for me, this is one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen. Not necessarily in what happens visually on screen, but how it makes you feel. And again, that that taking the subjective point of view and making that the objective vision cinematically of the movie, and how, it puts you in the characters, the children's headspaces, where they might go off and do something, but you kind of you want to get back to the safety of the TV. You want to get back to the safety of that innocuous, kind of downright stupid, but in its own way pleasant soundtrack of these, like these public domain cartoon VHSs that they're watching. And And even when it starts messing up, and you can tell that maybe that's even haunted, or that there's something going on with that you're still just like, I want to go there because I don't know what's going on up there.
Yeah.
And it's weird that, the geography of the house is sometimes semi-confusing because of literally it's changing. I mean, literally things are changing over the course of the movie. And it just fills you with such dread when you hear these whispers in the dark, come up here, go do this. One of the most chilling moments of the movie is when, one of the characters, the children, goes into the room and sees their father sitting at the edge of the bed. And you don't even really see his face. It's like he's staring off into a corner. And he tells them to look under the bed. And as it turns out, nothing happens. But that was the single, probably most horrifying, chilling moment of the movie, because you're like, oh my gosh, what am I about to see?
Yeah.
And I don't know how much we want to get into this. I've already been seeing online people reading into what literally the reality of the movie itself is. Is it purely a nightmare? Early on in the movie, there's talk about the boy's head getting hit, and are we actually? And I really don't want to go down this route too much to talk about it, but just to bring it up.
Yeah.
Is he really even seeing this literally? Is it in his head, and the darkness is playing mind games with him, and as it does for all of us when we're a certain age, and and he maybe has a legitimate kind of brain injury, not like super massive, but just like his head's hurting, and then he's creating all these things. Is there literally a ghost or demon possession happening in the room? Is that happening coupled with a domestic violence situation between the mother and the father? Again, I'm not super interested in talking about what is
that
the,
seems
the
like
truth
a
of all that.
random detail to bring up in the movie. And it feels like after that point, most of the movie changes immediately, I feel like, and this thing.
Do you think, I don't know, do you think that's just like giving an out for you to think whatever you want to think about it, and that's just like a wrench thrown in there that you can look at through that lens or whatever?
Yeah, because I mostly look at it as that, no, it doesn't have to make sense, and it seems like I'm kind of contradicting myself.
To that point, just to ask you this question, do you see this as a, quote, story happening, or is this more of an truly experiential
because it doesn't
thing?
have characters that, to me, I mean, that doesn't really matter, I guess, and most movies couldn't get away with this, and I would accept it. I don't necessarily like that about this movie, or it's not that I don't like it, but that allows me to make more of a remove from the movie and go, well, what's it matter, because they're just not even real people at a point. They're just like these children who supposedly exist. I can't see them. They don't show them.
I think in that way, for me, the children are there more to act as these avatars for us to literally be the experiential eyes through which we're viewing everything going on.
But so in that way, I don't. I look at the movie as a lot more just inherently experimental, and even though I don't like that it all breaks down at the end. Well, the thing I don't like about it, too, is that, this is kind of a spoiler, I guess, but at the end it has all these, like, weird shots of these doorways, like, more well-lit. It's not like it looks like something that is, like, painted or something. It's weird. It's like, it looks very, like, otherworldly. And I'm like, what is any of that? Is that supposed to be some kind of lore? Not really getting that. It's like, there's all these little things and then it says something like 500 and some days, and I'm like, what's that supposed to mean to me literally?
572 days.
It's like, does that mean that many days have passed in this? Does that mean how many days this child's been alive? What am I even though they're not.
This was one of the movies that, not even that I was like having trouble understanding what was happening, but as I was watching it, I'm like, I want to go back and read whatever somebody's Wikipedia plot description of even what this is just because I'm just curious, like, how do you even put this into words exactly what it is?
But that it says this certain amount of time, and I'm like, there's just all this stuff at the very end of the movie that is like the movie's breaking down, but then doesn't, and but then is also maybe trying to create all this like further lore of the movie, which I'm like, I'm not interested in any of that. Like, I just preferred it when it was more simplistic and basic, and just it was I laugh when I say it's an all caps vibe, that it was just like, it just was an experience that was happening, rather than, what's this mean over here? I don't care, because you're not making me care by anything else that's happened before this. But yeah, and then going back to that, if this is all just this, oh, he hit his head, whatever, that's also a way for us to think, oh, none of this actually happened to these people and whatever, and to feel better about it almost, which I'm not really interested in because, like I said, I don't care to feel that way because the characters don't feel real to me either, which sounds kind of callous, but like I said, that's just the nature of the movie to me, is that I'm not really feeling that out of that. But ultimately, I quite like the movie. I'm going to give it 3.5, I think. I mean, but all my kind of reservations about the movie don't matter because there's literally nothing else like this that I've seen ever, let alone in a theater.
I think I saw that it was like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 600 screens it's playing on. So we're lucky even Hickory was one of those,
Yeah.
Because that's a relatively still small amount.
It was made for like
$15,000, which I think is famously the number that Paranormal Activity was like close to that.
Yeah.
So obviously the marketing costs for it have went up, but again, horror is always consistently the genre that makes the most in return of investment because of how cheap they can be.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the quote story, as there is one, is like if you're looking to go to a movie for the quote story, you might be underwhelmed. But if you're looking to go into this with like this kind of new experiential lens and something that, again, is downright experimental to be something that most especially released in a multiplex, you're going to be. And again, if you have the patience for it, again, I think some people would probably like this as a 20-minute video on YouTube to see it stretched out.
But it's an hour and 40 minutes.
But with Paranormal Activity and the Blair Witch Project, which I think both of those movies are a little, I don't know. I think Blair Witch would be superior to this. Paranormal Activity would be close, but Paranormal Activity is also a little bit more conventional. But again, I wouldn't even say it's not exactly quote boring. There are stretches you feel the runtime, but I feel like that's part of the tension building, and various people are going to have more of a tolerance for that or not. Whether or not you're willing to kind of see stretches where quote nothing is happening, and I think that's sometimes selling it short because it's again building up that tension. And so I think again, your mileage will vary with this. If you are someone who, again, I'm not a horror fan, but I am interested in seeing new ways in which horror can be made. I am interested more in that. And there are plenty of horror movies I like or love. I mean, so when I say I'm not a fan, I'm not someone who's going to go just see any horror movie just because.
Yeah.
But I'm a fan of something that tries to be new and different, and I think this definitely would fit into that. The ending, I thought, was actually great.
Yeah.
The way the movie ends, which we'll go ahead and spoil this a little bit here, ends with this very vague face kind of appearing on screen. And at that point, we're literally feeling like we are the first person looking at this face. And it's one of the most chilling images I've seen in a movie, and I don't know how long, because you want to lean in and look and get, but you're also like, but I don't want to see what that really is. Yeah. And, the main character, if there is one, is named Kevin, the child. Ask him what his name is, and there is no response, and there's just that deafening silence. And then, like it says, the end, and you're like, okay, end now, please, thank you. It's just like there's just this inherent goosebumps that, and this was a movie that, I'll be honest, like there were moments of where I was feeling physical. I wasn't like shaking from fear, but I could feel goosebumps, and I could feel sweating was going on. And I mean, this movie did for me elicit physical responses.
No, it did for me too. I think, but for me, what normally happens with horror movies is I think about it after the fact a lot more and ponder over. And I've pondered over these images a lot over the last 2 days, but it didn't affect me as much as I thought it would, which I'm thankful for because I don't like feeling scared by movies like that. But no, in the moment, I mean, it was a rough experience to get through in a lot of ways, and because you're just constantly like, what is going to happen? I don't know. But also we didn't mention about the sound design of the movie, which was really impressive because of. I mean, that's a key. That's a very, very key ingredient for why this movie works to the extent it does. And most of it's honestly just like film grain crackling. Which is fake because it's shot on digital. But
I mean, this movie kind of literally puts you in that childhood space of staring into darkness for such long stretches where you're like, wait, did I just see something move? Or is my mind playing tricks on me? And there are times I could tell there was intentional movement.
Yeah.
But other times I could tell where nothing was, but I was just like imagining something was on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And again, that push and pull between I want to see what's on the other side, but I don't want to. I mean, that's fundamentally horror. I mean, that is fundamentally why we see horror movies, or why we're interested in horror movies in any way, is because we want to be scared, but we don't, and just that like whole tension. And I think this movie really is in that way a pure distillation of why we see horror movies and why we're interested in them. And to make something that fundamental and that essential by being so different and experimental, I think instantly makes this movie a must-see if you're interested in horror cinema in any way, or interested in something new for horror cinema. We can talk briefly, too, about the experience of seeing this movie. It was literally just us and this other couple. It's like a man and a woman, I think, that were literally in like the back left corner of us, which only added to this like weird tension of everything.
So we walked into the theater and we were the only ones in there before the movie even started. And there was a weird lighting effect in there where that whole back row was pitch black. Like, I couldn't even really see the back row.
Which only, I'll be honest, added to this subconscious thing in my head. Like,
and so, now, eventually, when the screen came on, you could see it was like putting a, light over that back area. But, that's where those people were sitting the whole time. Dead. Like, I heard the woman whispering a little bit, but overall, we're just dead silent the entire time.
And we were kind of like, we weren't talking, but like, every once in a while, we'd say a little something. And honestly, for me, like, looking over and saying a little something was a way to break the tension for some of it, because I was, oh my God, this is like, in a way that I'm kind of liking, unbearable. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very an intense
But then we got up to leave, because also the movie's credits happen at the beginning of the movie, and then the ending is the end, and it literally, the screen shuts off. And then it was like
there was less so when the movie started, as you said, and it has all the credits in the opening, like Tar randomly recently. That
also had credits at the end too. Also, like belabored it.
But like there was a point, like maybe when I could feel that there were 10 to 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden I was becoming terrified. I'm like, what is this movie going to end on? We're not going to have credits. And then I was starting to think, like, this is going to end on some image that is literally going to, like, you will remember this. Like, walking out of the movie, like, because it didn't have it at the end. It just had, like, a the end. And that was one of the most, like, happy the ends I've ever saw. Because I'm like, all right, I want to get out of here now. But, again,
anyway, the movie ends. We get up to leave. They are literally still sitting there.
Yeah.
Just sitting
Which,
there.
I mean, there are times we've seen movies where you just kind of want to sit and take it in, and that, frankly, could be one of those movies for some people. But I was like, no, I kind of want to leave. Goodbye. I want to get out into, like, the real world now. Like, and again, I don't say this with any resentment towards the movie. I mean, it's a credit to the movie that it took me to these places mentally.
But they just kept kind of, like, sitting there.
Yeah, it's just like... And I kind of wanted to look back, but I'm like, I'm not looking back. I'm getting out of here.
They were weird. I don't know what was going on there, but
could this movie signal a new type of horror movie to be made? Or
I feel like
different
my
new?
thesis on it is that this has already been in the ether. People wanting to make a movie like this, and
you think so? You think this is just a cinematic version of these things already being out there? Yeah.
Because I know enough about that kind of stuff.
Analog horror, some of it's called.
And just by nature of teaching middle schoolers and knowing the things that they watch and talk about, then I know that these things are out there and exist to the point where it's kind of a surprise just to see it. But I feel like we've all been kind of introduced to these things in these various ways and kind of these alternative ways where it wasn't a totally big surprise at something like this. Now, as far as will movies like this continue to be made, I mean, possibly. None of them, I think, are going to get to this level, though, of movie because this is what it is, and it's going to be obvious that everybody's doing.
I think we would agree that being Kyle Edward Ball's first movie, we're like, oh, well, whatever he makes coming forward, well, instantly we're like, yeah, we want to see what that's going to be, especially if he continues to be making, horror movies specifically. Any other thoughts on it before we end?
No, not really. Other than wait for that final.
Again, I would just encourage people to a lot of movies I'm not all that hesitant recommending. I would say you're only going to like this again if you are interested in horror and or are interested in something different. If you're easily scared, again, this might be deceptive because it's not a jump scare a minute kind of movie, but when it decides to turn the notches, it really gets to you in a fundamental way.
The movie's big jump scare, I was like, literally raising my eyebrows, like, wow, that was like halfway through the movie, like of the one moment when a face is kind of shown.
There's also one involving a toy towards the end.
Yeah,
that kind of makes you laugh after the fact.
Yeah,
but in the moment, I'm like,
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, it's a movie that should be seen in a theater or alone. I don't think this is a good group movie. Like, a lot of people would probably get together to watch this, and I feel like
I would think it's ideal that, like, maybe see it with one other person like we did. I mean, where you have somebody to refer to it and talk about it with.
But to see it with a group of people, you would laugh the whole time and break the tension, and you wouldn't get the full effect of the movie.
I saw some people saying that they'd only want to see this at night watching it on their laptop. I cannot think of a more terrifying thing to do in my life than to do that.
So I'm not totally advocating that, but that is what the movie wants from you. Yeah. The same way. So
because in my own way, again, I would prefer to see most anything, of course, theatrically anyways. I want to kind of have that tension broken, and then for me to walk out into the real world and see it, like, to do it still in my house. Not that, again, I don't think it would dwell with me in the way that, like you were saying, that you were fearing that it might, but it didn't. I don't think it would do that, but, like, I do want that little bit of separation between my own home and this. I'll be honest, I don't know how eagerly I would see this again. I probably will see it again at some point. But this did, in a fundamental way, like, creep me out in a way that most movies, even superior ones, do not. So, again, if you're interested in this sort of thing, check it out. If you're, like, a little squeamish, I would not in the least bit, of course, hold it against you if you're like, I'm not seeing this, I'm good. We were even just talking about it and describing it to our parents and our mom, and she's someone who does not like horror movies fundamentally, and even though she grew up watching some, and this would be like the absolute worst thing for somebody like her to see, you know what I mean? Especially involving your own home.
Which is funny because it's technically a rated R movie.
And involving children.
It's technically a rated R movie, I would assume, but there's not really a whole lot that happens to the point where it would be definitively. I would think it just would be on an experiential level, but I don't know.
So that's Skinamarink, currently playing in theaters, but I don't know how long that'll be, so... I got a feeling though.
Shudder.
And they had the Shudder logo before the movie too. I guess it's going to be streaming on there. I think some versions of it got leaked online a while back, and so some people have been.
That's what it was. Is it was I think it had been. I was reading into this. I think there was some leak that was supposed to go to a festival, and somehow it leaked online, and some people saw it that way. Yeah. It can only happen that way, I feel like.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So that's Skinamarink, currently in theaters, and now. We're going to get into some things a little less scary anyways. Here is the trailer for 1961's The Misfits.
Choke him down, Guido! Get him, Huston!
Stop!
Get him!
I don't feel that way about you, Kay.
Well, don't get discouraged, girl. You might. All right, come on outside, Jack.
Here. What's the trouble?
I don't place you floating around here like this. You belong to Gay?
I don't know where I belong.
Come on out. I got a surprise for you.
That audio doesn't really sell how strange
No,
that trailer is.
I mean,
perhaps one of the strangest trailers I've ever seen.
Yeah,
for a
because
movie.
the beginning of it shows Arthur Miller
like
first.
I can never think of any trailer that like silently like doesn't even have any voiceover really in it. Just like has the screenwriter of the movie, and that is just such a bizarre
and
a movie
yeah.
that stars Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, and even like, I mean, it shows John Huston, but John Huston was big. I mean, you know, and so even that would make a little more sense. But yeah, Arthur
check
Miller,
out the video of it online.
Yeah,
and you can find it.
And then it's just
so
a very
strange.
predictable '60s trailer. I mean, you know, otherwise.
Tell me what you said when we were starting to watch this about like what your thoughts on the poster were, because I thought that was like telling about the whole like puzzle motif.
Oh yeah,
like,
well, I talk mostly about the opening credits, which was kind of like a Saul Bass ripoff. But I just get so and my whole and I did like the Misfits, by the way. I want to go ahead and put that out there before everything we talk about.
Before he slams.
Yeah, well, not exactly, but especially in regards to you, who you really loved it, and I was kind of slightly nonplussed by it. But I guess it's just this whole like '60s impulse to be like, ooh, the puzzle pieces and all this like art, not Art Deco, but like this very like hip pop art style of the '60s. I just get so fed up with, and I mean,
it would only get more pronounced as the decade went on. This was in '60s,
right? So that's what's even more fascinating about it to me is you look at the poster and it's like, how do these people fit together? It's like, I don't know. I guess I'll watch the movie and find out. You know, it's like, I don't know. I don't remember what did I say in particular because I don't
just
remember
that like just the kind of. I think you were highlighting the. Just how obvious it was. It's just like it was trying to act opaque, but it was all about like, ooh, look at, just the openness of, oh, they're all misfits and they're all parts of a puzzle, but there's always going to be pieces missing. And again, that didn't really bother me, but it was like, again, laid bare the themes of the movie pretty unsubtle.
I'd already forgotten what I'd said about that, so I guess that's what it was.
So Levi, what is the Misfits about?
So the Misfits is a 1961 American neo-western film written by Arthur Miller. It was actually adapted from a kind of short story that he wrote for Esquire in 1957, and directed by John Huston, as we said, and then starring Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, Montgomery Clift, also Thelma Ritter, Eli Wallach. It's funny to me how high up Kevin McCarthy is listed in the credits for only being in one scene.
Briefly at the beginning.
But yeah, that's pretty much, I mean, there's other actors in the movie, but for the most part, not really. I mean, it's mostly just those few, which makes it feel a lot like a play in its own way.
Yeah, I mean, this is
think.
something I could easily see adapted into a play, except for the climax does involve something you couldn't do on stage.
It's very cinematic. That's what I really loved about the ending of the movie. I thought was the best stuff because it just like was practically without dialogue. And so that'll be part of some of my kind of problems with the movie later is like, obviously the dialogue's good, but it's so obviously good. And like I said, I'll explain more what I mean by that later. But to just see the movie be cinematic, I guess I was more on the Huston side than the Arthur Miller side of the equation on this. But yeah, so it's about what doesn't really describe what it is. Oh well, here the plot centers on Rosalind Tabor, played by Monroe, a newly divorced woman from Reno, and her relationships with friendly landlady Isabel Steers, Thelma Ritter, who's only really in half the movie and then kind of disappears for the last part of it. For the rasp, whatever that means. An old school cowboy, Gaylord Langland, played by Gable. Everybody calls him Gay throughout the movie. His tow truck driving and plane flying best friend, played by Wallach. And their rodeo riding, bronc busting friend, played by Montgomery Clift. So it's basically just about them. It's in that vein of very Hemingway-esque, kind of, or even Beat era-esque, just roaming around, hanging out, drinking, even Norman Mailer-esque, of a lot of that kind of mid-century.
I think in theory, Jack Kerouac could fit into that, but his books are a little different.
Well, that's what I was saying is the Beat whole
that
aspect to it, but that all-caps vibe. But yeah, the very mid-century kind of belief in the post-war, we don't know what we're doing, we're all alcoholics, let's all just hang out kind of movie.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what you're saying, the film feels like it doesn't have much of a plot. It does, but it's a muted one, I think we would agree. As we said last week, this movie has so much import wrapped around all the talents involved.
Yeah.
I think most explicitly, this movie will always be important, if nothing else, for being Marilyn Monroe's last film, Clark Gable's last film, one of the later films of Montgomery Clift, a young Eli Wallach, but as we were joking, he still looks like...
He looks like he's like 40.
Yeah.
And I don't know how actually old that he was. I'm going to have to look it up, but... Yeah, I mean...
So this was in 61 it would have came out.
Okay, so he was, nearly 50. So, he was in his 40s. But let's say young, because he was born in 1915. He literally only died in, 2014.
Well, how old was he when he died?
98.
Wow.
Going to be 99 that year. He was actually born on Pearl Harbor Day, 1915.
Okay.
So
this movie, again, as we said, has a lot of import wrapped around it. Strangely... It's not as known in the Huston filmography.
No.
I think mostly because it's kind of middle career Huston.
Yeah,
I mean,
because
obviously when most people think of Huston, they think of his earlier work with Humphrey Bogart
stuff, and then even with I don't know, Wise Blood or Fat City, like some of those later movies, or even just being in Chinatown, especially, or even The Dead, which was his last movie. But yeah, I mean, he
represents one of the few. Classic
Asphalt Jungle was even before this, and so
classic Hollywood directors who had a career that extended kind of well past a lot of his own contemporaries.
Prizzi's Honor was another one I was thinking
of later. And Huston himself famously started off as a screenwriter in Hollywood.
Yeah,
and I feel like he's a good match for Miller. I feel like because Arthur Miller, again, he was one of the, at the height of his career, really in a lot of ways of his import around this time. Not only just being married to Monroe when their marriage was kind of dissolving, I think, as this movie was being made, but he was just kind of, again, a very, the mid-century America was a very strange time where playwrights were semi-celebrities, and even just putting Arthur Miller's name on something was something that, I might not have seen that, but I read a review in the New York Times, or I heard in Time Magazine that he's a great writer, and so that was just a name that was just already kind of known in the American populace, certainly not on the level of Monroe or Gable, but Arthur Miller writing a movie with his current wife or in it, that had to have just this inherent import that this movie garners. And again, this is a I don't know. It stakes itself in some melodramatic moments, but on the whole, it's an unflashy movie.
Yeah.
It's a movie about failure, about people as failures, which again is strange anytime you cast stars of the success of Gable or Monroe as, quote, failures. This was a criticism that some people had actually about, like, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, about, DiCaprio and Pitt's characters playing these B movie or B actor side parts, but they're being played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt, which I kind of understand that criticism, but I think they do such a great job.
I don't understand why that's a criticism.
Who cares?
But,
just that it, like, quote, takes me out of the movie to see them be, quote, not as successful when it's being played by literally two of the most successful actors in the industry,
That's what movies are about.
Yeah, I mean, it's about giving. And
I know what you mean.
Both of them are so great in those roles, it doesn't matter, and you give way to it.
I don't buy that. I mean, I get what people say when, it takes me out of the movie that these stars are that. It's like, but that's kind of what acting is all about, is that you're supposed to not make so much of stardom as you make of the acting talent.
And I think one of the most memorable things about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the scene of DiCaprio alone in his trailer yelling at himself, and he's just so pathetic and wretched, and I think he does such a great job of taking that very private moment that I would imagine a lot of actors have had and kind of laying that bare. I think that works to that advantage. But nonetheless, this movie is, again, positioning this love story between Gable and Monroe. There's been a lot written about this. Blonde even recently kind of made this a part of the text of that movie, that, Monroe's, in her, extra textual, in her real life, that her father had, abandoned her and her mother when she was young, and as a way to comfort her daughter, Monroe's mother went as far as to even, I think on a few occasions, just kind of, obviously lying to a child, but saying, "Oh, Clark Gable's your father." And so there's all this import based around Monroe's own biography, along with Gable's fading star and the kind of tragedy of Gable's life with Carole Lombard and her passing during World War II that tragically took her life, and that they were so deeply in love, and that was kind of something that he was, when we all think of Clark Gable, I think most of us think of 30s Clark Gable. We think of Gone with the Wind Clark Gable and that era of him. But I mean, he was a star who endured, and this being his last movie, again, I think it fits well within the masculinity he typically portrayed. But this movie's also interested in taking issue with that masculinity, which is such a fascinating thing, because I think a misreading of a lot of Huston's Bogart movies would say, oh, his movies were about men being men. You think about how insecure Bogart is in most of those
African
movies.
Queen, especially Treasure Sierra Madre.
And I think people have an idea, oh, that was when men were men. You go back and watch those movies, Bogart's characters are very, sometimes emasculated, sometimes questioning their own manhood. And so, I think those movies don't get enough credit sometimes for being, a movie like Treasure Sierra Madre, how desperate and sycophantic he is through, really, as that movie progresses.
That's one of the more modern movies of classic Hollywood, I think, in a lot of ways, as far as just portraying characters is totally insane, like, deranged individuals, because and that's kind of proto-method in its own way. I mean, because you would see something like that with Bogart kind of doing a similar thing, but still maintaining his manhood with something like In a Lonely Place with Nicholas Ray. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. Something like Key Largo is a lot more basic.
Yeah, that's a little more.
Yes, or even Maltese Falcon.
Yeah,
but I think something, and the African Queen also, like I mentioned, that and Treasure Sierra Madre, I think are good examples of Bogart being a lot more desperate, which is something we really hadn't seen since like Black Legion, maybe.
Right.
But
right,
yeah.
But again, Huston himself was, again, a literary figure, not as far as writing novels, but in terms of being a screenwriter in Hollywood. Also, and I had forgotten some of these other names. These are other people he had co-written some movies with. Truman Capote, he co-wrote Beat the Devil in 1953, which
I was just looking about that movie. It's like an adventure comedy film. It says that it's I'm looking here what it's about.
I love adventure, and I love comedy.
It says, concerns the adventures of motley crew of swindlers and ne'er-do-wells trying to claim land rich in uranium deposits in Kenya as they wait in a small Italian port to travel aboard tramp steamer en route to Mombasa. Is there anything else going on in that plot? Dang. Like,
yeah, I actually really want to see that. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, it says that the book was written by a guy named Francis Claude Cockburn. So there you go.
This is such a 1957 sounding movie.
Yeah.
Heaven knows, Mr. Allison.
Yeah,
Says stars Mitchum.
Right.
Tells the story of two people stranded on a Japanese-occupied island in the Pacific Ocean during World War II. Moby Dick he also made, which I've not seen.
The Spencer Tracy.
Gregory Peck.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gregory
Spencer
Peck.
Tracy was in...
No, he was in Old Man in the Sea. That's right.
Yeah. Co-written with Ray Bradbury, which I had no idea that he had anything to do with that. I've not seen that. I know there are certain people that I think Scorsese is one of them that really think that's a really powerful, underrated movie. I've not seen it, so I don't know.
That Moby Dick.
Yeah, that version.
Probably because he's just a big fan of
I
John
think
Huston.
Gregory Peck was very proud of it too. I don't know if he produced it or something.
I think that movie's randomly short for what it could be for being about Moby Dick.
It's 116 minutes.
Yeah.
Which
especially for the 50s, you think that would have been a really long movie or something. You know?
Yeah, you thought that would have been longer. Yeah. Let's get into this movie itself.
Okay.
I'm going to lay this bare. This is probably, as far as newer, older movies I've seen over the last so many years, among my favorites. This is a movie that I went into it had a big reputation, and it had a lot of things to live up to. And for me, this might sound lazy, just by being what it is, in the honest way that it is, I think stands as one of the kind of almost this elegiac epilogue to old Hollywood to me. In many ways, again, it's this, we've talked about it at length. You know, the early 60s through the mid-60s was kind of this huge transitional period. What people had known and associated with classic Hollywood was starting to fade, in large part because, you know, we were looking across the Atlantic and around the world and seeing all these transformational things that cinema was going through. And you can feel a lot of these Hollywood men of a little bit of an older era, and even the stars themselves, as far as how actors and acting was changing on film, starting to be a little bit challenged, starting to thinking, what are we going to do with this? And that was a big reason why kind of earlier, a few years earlier, I feel like the method was starting to take off more. You had, obviously, the rise of stars like James Dean, Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, who's in this movie, that there was this naturalism that was attempting to be done through film acting, which, of course, I don't think would really, really fundamentally break through until the 70s, until New Hollywood, and when you had, you know, the Pacinos and the De Niros and the Dustin Hoffmans come in. But this movie feels like a fascinating half measure, a kind of a fade into not exactly that era, but a fading out more so of old Hollywood, especially taking these actors like, Gable himself, who had been the height of what stardom was back in the 30s and into the 40s. Monroe, of course, what she meant as this sex symbol in the 40s through the 50s and into the very, very early 60s. That this movie, again, by being kind of messy, by being kind of imperfect, in its own way, to me, is perfect. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Just by being this fading out of a certain era. And it's sort of like intentional dissatisfaction and intentional unfulfillment, for me, makes it special. Not only for everybody involved, but again, as this testament for this larger industrial change that was happening, but also, you know, a movie this reminded me of, and this gets into something we might talk about later, was, you know, something like The Last Picture Show, which again didn't have quite the stars that this had, but in terms of this kind of small town life, this sense of time passing you by, but you not being able to do anything about it. Those kind of stories for me are catnip, so I just really love this movie in a pretty big fundamental way, while also understanding the imperfections of it. And again, I think if there had to be a weak section, it would likely be kind of the middle portion where it is kind of, there is nothing conventionally going on. For you though, Levi, what about this movie worked and perhaps didn't work?
Well, I'll speak first about what I didn't care for about the movie, and I guess it just goes into more of a bigger kind of just exhaustion with, because a lot of people talk about, you know, obviously the 20s and 30s being such a melding and meshing of the theater and movies, because by nature of the actors they already had a big stock of actors trained as theater professionals. Well,
especially with sound now,
right.
It's like that's more important.
And so, well, and even before that, just by facial expression, that was more important when the silent movies too. But yeah, the very theatrical acting that really took place in the 30s especially. But I actually think randomly the 50s isn't necessarily a bigger version of that, but it feels like in the 50s to me you had kind of the emergence of television, which by nature of like using the movie Marty, for example, which is Patty Chayefsky wrote basically a teleplay version of that was on TV and then it was made into a movie. A lot of stuff like that where it's like these theater productions are made into movies. Same thing happened with Gore Vidal's The Best Man. I mean, you could go down a big list. But all these people that kind of both came out of television and theater, because it was easy to put that on TV because they were shorter. You could do them in like an hour, whatever. But then that kind of happened a lot with movies too, where that made its way into all these movies. And it was like, oh, you got these playwrights writing on this. Now, of course, this also happened in the 40s with all these big writers coming out to Hollywood and writing these, a lot of them being novelists for the most part, but also a lot of, people like Clifford Odets and all these people that came out and wrote these screenplays and stuff, and Faulkner, well, him being he was primarily a novelist, but all these people coming out to write screenplays and stuff, and then, I don't know, it's just, after a point in the 50s that happened so often, I just personally tire of that a little bit, and just that whole form of movie with these, like, characters saying these very big things in these very big ways, and part of that's part of the melodrama, part of the method, but I feel like these stars like Clift or Brando or Dean were more interested in just being movie stars. That wasn't as big of a part of their acting felt more natural to me, and the transition felt more natural. But for me, it's not so much the actors in this movie as it is just simply the screenplay and it just feels to me like I've heard all these things before, seen it all before in other movies. I thought a lot about On the Waterfront while watching this, or Nicholas Ray's movies of the time, and how much I just prefer those of feeling fresher and newer.
As far as with Ray's movies are less wordy and less about the screenplay, I feel like, more so than the visuals of those are more visually cinematic movies in that way.
Well, because famously he wrote that treatment before he made Rebel Without a Cause that was literally just a man on fire running in the street.
Yeah.
To me, that sums up what could be so great about 50s cinema, and the method is the image and the expression. This movie's very wordy to me, and a lot of those types of movies are, and I guess it for me it just gets tiresome personally.
I know you would agree with this. While you're criticizing that, don't you also find it so enriching and enlightening to go back and see an era that was as consumed with that intellectualism in a commercial way compared to what we see now? I mean,
no question. But and then of course that became the 60s, and it became a lot more about film theory as a concept of the French New Wave and European cinema becoming bigger, and that's just something I'm a little more inherently. It's weird because I'm always somebody who says I want movies that are about things and have stories. I don't care as much about style. But that's why I think the 70s was so impressive, is it was a marriage of both of those things.
Right.
So I guess for me, what worked for me about the movie is when it was more of just that Huston making a movie, rather than just filming the actors doing things.
Yeah.
Also, even after Blonde and having seen some of her other movies, I'm not that fond of Monroe as an actress. I think that she's good, but I think by nature of her demise and sad life, which I think is a tragedy and am very interested in, but I think there's a lot of her performances people read a lot into now that weren't as much there as we think they are.
Interestingly, I went back and read some Norman Mailer writings about Monroe, which he wrote about a lot, her, and kind of did some pseudo-biographies of her. Mind of an Outlaw, these selected essays collection I have that literally we're setting the microphone on right now. That I went back and read, because I hadn't, I read that book earlier this last year, and I was like, what did he think of the Misfits again? I think I remember him bringing it up. And he was not really all that big of a fan of the movie. He saw her more as this ghost-like presence. He didn't think that it was fully using her to the extent to which she should have been. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that, but I would instead say, well, again, to me, the brilliance of this movie is it catches everybody at the exact right moment of their lives and their careers. kind of the whole point is, sadly, when we go back and look at this movie, that this was kind of us, us being the movie audience or American culture, seeing her kind of pass away in real time or waste away. This is a character who's trying to run away from all these problems that are hinted at, but we don't entirely see. And this is her trying to get away and unfortunately waste away. And that, to me, is kind of the point of the movie, is that it's not that big Monroe that we had seen in the past. Sometimes, play ditzy characters. This is one that's kind of world-weary, one who is kind of sick of running and just wants to still, paradoxically get away, but also thinks that she's found the answer to her problems in Gay, but really all she finds in Gay is another unfulfilling man who's trying to be her father more than an equal or a lover. And I think that is kind of the point of her performance, point of the character in relation to the other characters. That, again, it's, I'm a little bit more of a Monroe fan on film maybe than you are, but I feel like that's the point of her place in the movie, is to be that kind of unfulfilled woman who's both young but also clearly older than we remember her to be, and that world weariness and that kind of maturity through misbegotten circumstance that I think gives a role that, again, might not have as much written on the page, that life, but again, that's the whole point of really all these characters in this movie, is where they are in relation to that. Another thing too, similarly, was how Cliff's character, which is a little bit more of a side note in this than I kind of expected.
Who's my favorite character in the movie, and I'll talk more about in a little while. But,
again, he's this character who, is clearly a handsome man, but also is kind of aging past where everybody remembers him to be or thought him to be, and who continually gets in these rodeo injuries, which, again, very clearly feels like this semi-autobiographical look at how he had a car crash that had severely changed some of his looks and had aged him quite a bit. And that's almost this kind of uncomfortable thing to watch, is to see, again, his own history writ large on the screen through literally the narrative of the text. And to me, that's part of the brilliance of this movie, and I think it can frankly be an uncomfortable thing to talk about, is when the subtext becomes the text. Now, I could see somebody, not as much necessarily at the time, but kind of years later, rolling their eyes at that and thinking there's not enough of a remove between the narrative and the real life people. But again, as a historical document, I think that's what makes it fascinating, is that, like, the subtext of this movie is so strong, is so thick, frankly, could be a flaw, and I think, is a flaw to an extent, but it's so overwhelming and overpowerful that, for me, it's part of the watchability of this movie, is to see the subtext of what's beneath the story, but also the screen presences and lives of these people literally becoming the textual film. You know what I mean? Is literally the story is part of that.
Yeah.
Would you say that for you is not, there's not enough of a remove or not enough of a difference, that sometimes that's belabored or weighs the movie down?
No, I could care less about that. I am interested in that as a concept. I guess like I said, my issue is just the wordiness of Miller's screenplay, because I think where Monroe is at her best, where Gable is at his best, is in the final moments where they don't have to say anything, and the themes of the movie are told visually by trying to wrestle horses to the ground and eventually letting them go. It seems very obvious, but like, it's all told visually. You don't have to say it out loud. And so for me, that's where I think the movie is most mature, is by just showing us what's happening rather than telling us. And and so for me, most of the movie just being told about how miserable these people are over and over, and oh, my life had this and I was disappointed by this, that's fine to a certain extent, but I think the movie's, like I said, at its best when it just shows us what is more, uses visual motif rather than just dialogue. So yeah, I don't care so much about that. I
wonder if part of that is, Huston himself, obviously, as we said, was a writer. I wonder if he was, himself respected Miller enough where he didn't want to get in and change as much of that, like, wordiness of that. He wanted to respect, I guess, Miller's work at the screenwriting level.
Now, my favorite section of the movie is the stuff with Cliff, and he kind of comes in towards about midway, I guess. My favorite whole scene is where he's in the phone booth talking to his mother on the phone, and like it's kind of muffled, but you can hear through the glass of him talking. And I feel like with him, there is definitely and also the whole movie being about masculinity. I was interested in his, by the end, disinterest in continuing to be a rodeo rider, disinterested in catching the horses. That's a very method kind of anti-masculine, concept that Dean and Brando and Clift had, done in the 50s, but feels welcome amongst all this other, Wallach and Gable or just don't care and are like, no, we need to do this, and Monroe's not wanting them to do it. But you get the sense that Clift isn't even feeling this way because of Monroe. He just feels that way anyway and just feels burnt out. Mm-hmm. And so I found all that to be very compelling. And like I said, a lot of that goes without dialogue as well. So mm-hmm. I think it's where the acting is just allowed to happen that they do their best work. And I mean, Gable is probably at the best and height of his career when he's just literally walking away defeated after wrestling a horse to the ground, which of course a lot of that stunt work, but the point, that's not the point, obviously, is that, so that all I feel like totally elevates the movie for me liking it even less, is that it's finally able to just, it feels like the most of the movie's the setup for that really brilliant third act mm-hmm. for me. Yeah. But
I would say, I wouldn't disagree with that. I would only say, I guess, that to me, that's part of the brilliance of the movie is literally the characters themselves being consumed with words, justification, this is where I come from, this is who I am, but ultimately those cathartic moments without words. I think it's that building of that tension through that to be released through those visuals. I think that works for me, and I understand those criticisms.
Well, yeah, and everybody, and it's, I feel corny to even say it, but that whole actions speak louder than words, I guess, because it shows you who they really are in the final moments of the movie.
And I think that the ending is very, very powerful. I think the whole idea of him, again, it makes the motif text. I mean, it's of this idea of trying to wrestle this wild animal, trying to like make the wild animal build to fall to his will and for him to have control over it, and then the decision to kind of let it go after kind of trying to prove to himself and to everyone else that he can do it. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's just clear standing for Monroe, who continually is trying to let that animal go, and obviously she feels that empathy with that. And again, that kind of ending on an ellipses and that inconclusive conclusion feels, I feel like right for the conclusion of this story, and again is only, adds to the tragedy of what happened to these people soon after that. I want to talk a little bit too about the modernizing of the Western, because I think this movie, I think you said in the Wikipedia description, it described it as a neo-Western. That, the Western itself had been undergoing some transformations. We've talked about this in the past, but another movie I think a lot about with this is the movie The Lusty Men, which is a really kind of a not great title for a pretty great movie, Nicholas Ray movie. It has Robert Mitchum in it. That also involves rodeo circuit. Yeah. It is fascinating to see this movie as kind of set in a Western landscape, set in this Western place, but to not have that, be it in not only modern day, but also to have that visual cue that of audiences in 1961 would have had of, oh, this is set in a Western landscape and it's talking about cowboy and we're seeing that happen, but to have it set in a modern context. What about, that setting to you was novel or interesting in relation to the Western? Did that kind of draw any thoughts on your end about
that for this movie?
Yeah, just this movie kind of being a Western unofficially, but it being a modern Western without kind of the traditional conceits that,
Western the first part of the movie all being set in Reno, is a big part of that. And I mean,
and we were joking when we were watching it that Reno almost is a joke and a punchline, just in terms of it's not exactly Vegas. It's got this reputation of being like America's biggest small town. I feel like that, early on kind of sets the stage for who these characters are that would even gravitate or try to see such a place as a restart.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I think that the inherent kind of what the movie's really about is this whole idea of coming out to the West and having all these ideas about it, and then the disappointments that it brings because you get out there and there's nothing there. So it's kind of just like, okay.
There's the line she says, like, "Where's your home?" And they're just driving by this, like, it just looks like pretty much desert, empty landscape, and he just looks out at, the windows, like, this is my home, basically. I don't have a physical place that I rest my head. This is all home to me,
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think it just, when I say it acts as a good backdrop, that might, like, limit what it is to the movie, but I think it's as simple as that, is it just that the West, just in general, is this whole... just a grab bag of any kind of theme that you want to expand upon that's going to be there about disappointment and hopes and the pioneer spirit and the just then everybody hangs out there and then because you mentioned the Last Picture Show earlier, I think that's a really effective version of that. If everybody comes out west and then when they realize there's nothing there, they move on.
Yeah,
and
also the falseness that a lot of the characters have that. Well, I'm going to go somewhere else and make a big success of myself, and I'm not coming back here.
Yeah.
That's a
and almost
small town
the
stories.
reason that California is so big is because everybody kept moving on to the point where they got to the ocean, just said, well, I can't go any further, so I guess this is where I'm going to stay, and that's kind of where everybody that's why California, I think, in a lot of ways is so big, is because they kept wanting something else, got there, couldn't find it, and was like, well, I don't want to go back, so I might as well just stay here.
Well, that in general goes to the, all the way back to the, the mid 19th century in terms of, the gold rush, there's all these great things. I mean, that is so built in California's legend or mindset is all, what could be, maybe, the what if.
Inherently, Nevada, I think, is an interesting...
it's like the last truck stop.
The people that don't leave there too, they kind of just stay there, and so that's going to be a whole, because Nevada just in general kind of attracts that kind of whiny, brattish kind of human being that most of these people are, and so I think that it works as a good setting. I think for that even the cowboys coming to Reno just to be like, let's see what's going on there, and like nothing's really there.
And speaking of the cowboy nature of this, there's this constant insistence on Gable's character's part, that I'm going to be cowboy and as long as I can, and he's clearly a man that's like, you should be retired and sitting on a rocking chair on some porch somewhere. And then, like, I'm not selling out or making wages, they kept saying, or making real wages, that
having a normal job.
But this idea that I'm gonna be free, I'm gonna do what I want to do, and kind of the inherent falseness of a lot of those notions, and the idea of like, who are you trying to please? Are you trying to prove yourself to other people, or are you trying to look in the mirror and prove yourself to yourself? And that's. What a lot of Miller's work in its own ways about on the at the playwright level, but and kind of that insistence at the end of Gable's character, kind of sort of giving up, but doing it with a sense of, I did my fight, I was who I wanted to be, and even though I have to kind of give up these aspirations I once had of myself, this kind of whole end of the road, end of the line idea. Which, again, I think is very fitting for him to do at this stage of his career and what turned out to be his final role and his final performance of that. What legacy do you think this movie leaves? I mean, we've kind of been talking about the legacy is the text at this point. I mean,
I think most people...
Where does this stand in film history to you in terms of as an artifact?
I think it stands as that. It's almost like I don't want to be too negative about it because it is a pretty good movie, but... It's almost like the Game of Fate in its own way, imagery of just like, you got everybody together, and then it's like, okay, but what are they doing?
And those who don't know, we're referring to the Game of Fate image in Bo's Family
Entertainment.
You can find it anywhere of this frozen in time, James Dean, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and inexplicably Humphrey Bogart are part of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it feels like that, and I think that's what a lot of people come to the movie with, and I think there's a lot like John F. Kennedy's presidency, a lot of like hand-wringing, and it was really great though, wasn't it? Just because the people died, and it's like, now there are a lot of things about this movie that are buried deep in there that really do speak to something, and I think that is important. But I do think a lot of the kind of legacy of the movie is inflated by nature of its its circumstances of release. But
I think that's a fair assessment, even though of someone who did love the movie from my end. But I think also it's just, for me, it is like this. We've talked about this with other movies, like the work of John Frankenheimer generally, that it is a transitionary filmic oddity in terms of being this step between what classic Hollywood film style was compared to what film style was.
And I think I tire of that too, to be honest. I think just
we've seen and talk about a lot of those things a lot personally. So I just
that's another thing. Another one of these, okay, and I kind of just.
But this is kind of the granddaddy of that too, to finally get around to it,
Yeah, so I mean that's another thing is I just tire of 50s and kind of early 60s cinema of a lot of it. Now there's the great versions of it that I'll talk about any time of On the Waterfront or Nicholas Ray's movies or even
like Dr. Strangelove representing this new irreverence that something like this is not this is a movie that is very reverent of everyone involved and has that implicit import.
Yeah,
which at a certain point was growing stale, frankly. Even though
I think that's part of it is like everybody looks back on the 50s and they're like, oh, look at how, and the melodrama and all that and all these movies, and they're like, oh man, look at how ahead of its time these things were, and it's like. Yeah, but then finally we got the 60s and the 70s, and it's kind of a weird period because I'd almost prefer to have the older movies or the newer ones, not this kind of in between. Mm-hmm. I kind of tire of because everybody talks about it all the time. We do too. So I think that's another thing is my just general fatigue with this kind of seeped into the movie too. I don't know, but
I think that's fair. I did quite love the movie, but I do. I think for me, it's a movie that I would consider a flawed masterpiece. I mean, I think I would give it 5 stars, and I really totally loved it. But what I kind of love about it is its incompleteness, is its kind of, again, not to go back to that whole idea of the puzzle, but like the idea that it all doesn't totally fit together. And I'm talking about more than the characters. I'm talking about like even the movie itself. But I think if you're interested in any of these stars or this time period, it's definitely got a lot of rewarding things to say. And I generally really love cinema that aspires for literary ambitions, because that is in really all eras, I think, actually pretty rare. Yeah. Now, I mean, there are movies based off books all the time, so I'm not even saying that it has to be based on a book. Yeah. But a movie that has literary ambitions, that's why really the work of I about said Todd Phillips. Todd Fields really appeals to me, like Tar or something like Little Children, which is, by definition, literally an adaptation of a novel, but has even beyond that, has a literary conceit. And I just really love movies that aspire for that. So again, we saw the Misfits on a Blu-ray. You had that it's one of those movies that again literally had been sitting on the shelf for a long time, and we were like, all right. And so this podcast, I think more than anything, was a great opportunity to check it out. Yeah. So the Misfits, I'm not sure if it's streaming anywhere, but it probably is somewhere. Feel free to check it out. But what did we decide to pair that with? Another movie involving animal hijinks. Hijacking. Dunston
hijacks.
Yeah. Here is not only one, but 2 brief trailers for Dunston Checks In.
No heart can resist him. No kid can live without him. No chimney can stop him. And when he drops in, you'd better not pout. Dunston Checks In to a theater near you.
The world's most debonair hero.
Yeah! There's a gorilla in the bathroom!
Can be found where the action is. His name is Dunston. He's conducting covert operations. Romancing irresistible women.
Oh, that's just how I like it.
And facing unimaginable danger. Dunston, checks in.
Yes.
Oh, more. I like it rough.
Oh.
So, this is a movie that I actually saw not a whole lot growing up, but some. I remember I told our mom that we were doing this a while back. She said, "Oh, we watched that all the time." I don't think we watched it all the time, but we watched it some. But more even than this movie, we told our cousin Philip that we were doing this, and he rightfully said, and I think this is how this movie's mostly remembered, even in my head. It's like, oh yeah, the VHS trailer that's on the VHS for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. Right. That's what really mostly I associate.
Because that's
this
one of those
with,
things I think that a lot of people see something like that and they're like, "Wow, what is that?"
And never end up seeing that, but it's in their heads as this thing. And now I did actually watch this some growing up, but as you said,
it's like that Dragonheart movie that's on the Mummy VHS, or Camelot, that whatever that movie was, that was
Quest for Camelot. It was on Batman and Robin, I think.
Yeah,
Batman and Robin VHS. Yeah. So again, as you said,
or the fact that the eraser was in all those DVD ads.
Yeah, right.
But
of
we saw it.
Groundbreaking DVD.
Your luggage. I mean, Now, speaking of luggage, Dunston checks in.
Before that though, I want to briefly talk about these trailers again. As you said, it's like, oh, he's Santa. And then I love the James Bond one, which is like different enough to
downright inappropriate, which this whole movie's totally inappropriate anyway. But
that had to be right off the like smash of GoldenEye, which you know probably more about this than I. Really relaunched Bond in a big way in the 90s.
That was, I think, at the time the biggest gap between Bond movies was between License to Kill and GoldenEye, which are both really good movies. Now GoldenEye especially is really good.
Yeah.
And like probably the best Bond movie very easily until obviously Casino Royale, but in some ways I prefer to even some of these newer Daniel Craig movies for just being a really great
action movie,
succinct Bond movie.
No, action movie too.
And action
movie.
Yes, it's just like movies, really good.
Yeah. And Brosnan was a good Bond, and I think even in the bad movies, and I think his movies got worse, but he was always good.
Yeah,
and that's obviously
The World Is Not Enough. I don't think is all that good, but is actually like a good enough little movie. I mean, Die Another Day is literally one of the worst things I've ever seen. Like that movie is so bad. Tomorrow Never Dies has a really good opening.
I remember liking that movie more. I need to go back and watch it.
Well, hang on. You know the story about Tomorrow Never Dies, right?
Remind me.
Okay, so the title of that movie, I kid you not, was going to be Tomorrow Never Lies, which makes no sense. But the whole thing about that was, because that whole movie is kind of interesting because it's about Jonathan Pryce's character is like this like a news corporate magnate, and it's just like
if Rupert Murdoch were a supervillain.
Basically,
excuse me,
right.
Rupert Murdoch
were in a Bond movie, basically.
Yeah.
And it was going to be this whole thing about, well, Tomorrow Never Lies, because that's the name of the newspaper. I kid you not, they accidentally had a typo and made it Tomorrow Never Dies, and they were like, oh, that sounds even better, let's keep that.
That's so stupid.
Now, never forget also that the basically, I guess what you would call the MacGuffin of the opening moments of that movie is literally Ricky Jay as a Russian general.
Yeah.
Like,
what I really love about...
Because then there was Backseat Driver moment was in that.
The World Is Not Enough had that villain, that guy who's in the Trainspotting movies.
Yes,
who has like, he was shot in the head.
Yeah.
And the bullet, the whole thing is like the bullet's like slowly moving through his
he's like
brain.
basically going more insane.
And so like, that, and I think it's like, and it's making him crazier. It's got all this stupid psychobabble.
It's like about as dumb as the whole Die Another Day character who like a bomb exploded.
Busted all those diamonds.
All the diamonds went in his face. It's like, can that not easily be taken out?
That's and then there was like his brother or whatever that was like he was a Korean guy, and then he got all this surgery, and he's now a white guy.
Yeah, that seems so kind of lightly racist. I don't know how, but it's just something.
But the great
that.
thing about GoldenEye, to almost bring this to a conclusion, this Brosnan Bond
is
Divergence.
You'll blow the gas tanks.
It's like the whole idea of like, again, it's a little version of subtext being the text, like of. Oh, we thought the Soviet Union was defeated, but this last gasp of like Russian evilness, it comes back. Like, what could ever defeat that? Oh, let's look in the closet and find James Bond himself.
Right.
I mean, again, that had not been those movies had not been made, so that's just the perfect storm of
Well, especially because the
great
Bond
story, a great director doing great action, and a great new Bond.
Yeah, because even before
in the mid '90s, post Die Hard,
License to Kill was very much it was not really a Cold War movie at all. That was very much like a vague 80s cartel movie with like a revenge plot. Now, The Living Daylights is actually one of the most interesting and blatant Cold War Bond movies. So it's interesting they kind of, after that, did that. But yeah, that was interesting to do.
Again, I keep trying to get out of this divergence, but I can't.
GoldenEye.
But you like Timothy Dalton as Bond.
Yeah,
a lot of people like him. Yeah. A lot of people say he's the closest to the quote literary Bond.
I have no opinion on that because I've only read one book of those, but yeah, he's good.
It seems like those movies go for a little bit of a different. I mean, they came after the Moore movies, I guess, but like they go for a little bit of a different.
And
thing,
Moore, I actually like Moore's Bond. I always thought I wouldn't. His movies aren't that good, but he's actually fine. Now he has some pretty good ones. A couple that are actually like, this is actually kind of good. Like Spy Who Loved Me is a really pretty good movie.
I always forget the Tomorrow Never Dies story, and every time I remember that, I'm like, that. Wow! Like every dumb thing people have ever said about Hollywood, I'm like, is wrapped up in that story. Like, but because Tomorrow Never Lies, I'm like, even that title, I scratch my head. I'm like, what? But I'm like, it's like a newspaper. It's like and I'm like, okay. Tomorrow Never Dies. It literally makes no sense.
Yeah.
And like, now, The World Is Not Enough sounds genius by comparison because that's like, oh, the world is not enough for this villain. Like that. Yeah. That kind of makes sense.
Or almost like Christmas Comes Only Once. Like, the world is not enough sounds like something that the Brosnan Bond would say while having sex with someone. You know
I do love that GoldenEye's like, we're not giving you a phrase like, just, that's
it's
the name
not like, Xenia, I can't breathe. Like, he says breathe, but yeah. That whole movie is just fascinating. Right. We should do actually a commentary on that someday.
Maybe we will one day.
Because a lot on a top. Xenia on a top.
What was oh gosh, in World Is Not Enough. Yeah. Not Carmen Electra. What was her name? Her name in that.
You know what's funny about The World's Not Enough? There's a whole moment where he literally blows a woman away, shoots her straight in the face. You remember that? And it's just like, what the hell?
Denise Richards, Dr. Christmas Jones.
Yeah. Christmas only comes once a year.
Yeah, right. And then what was Halle Berry's name in Die Another Day? That was something like...
It was something dumb.
Let's see. I promise this conversation's about to end.
Will
Jinx Johnson.
It's actually not as bad as I remembered, but...
Selma Hayek, Saffron Burrows. Who was that? Oh, I think I barely remember her. And Sophie Ellis-Bextor were also considered for the role. Anyways, Dunston checks in. Levi, what is Dunston checks in all about?
So Dunston Checks In is a 1996 Canadian-American children's comedy film directed by Ken Kwapis. Stars Eric Lloyd, Graham Sack. We've been talking a lot. I promise we're going to move on to this movie. We've been talking a lot recently about the whole British vocab of like they've been sacked or they need to be sacked because there's been all this stuff of Chelsea that everybody's like sack Graham Potter or whatever as the manager.
And of our generation, we first came across this term and word from the Harry Potter series.
Like he's been sacked.
Yeah,
and then even if anyone who's seen that whole like Everton protest that happened at the Everton Football Club stuff, where they were like sack the management or whatever. But anyway, Jason Alexander, Faye Dunaway, Rupert Everett, and Paul Rubens and Glenn Shaddix, and Sam the Orangutan is Dunston. Now, this movie doesn't give a very simple plot description, but I'm going to go through it very quickly. So Eric Lloyd's character is the son of Jason Alexander's character, who is the manager of this like 5-star hotel called the Majestic Hotel in New York City. I guess it's in New York. It doesn't make a big deal about that. But anyway, and there's this whole thing of like Faye Dunaway's character is like the kind of owner of or one of the big owners of the whole hotel chain of the Majestic stuff. Anyway, and so she's like, "Oh, you need to make this look real good. We're having this. What's it called? The Crystal Ball."
Yeah. Well, before that too, like they're a 5-star.
Yeah.
Diamond, whatever hotel, and they're adding a 6-star, and so we've got to go all out. There's somebody here that's judging it.
The Le Mans Traveler organization, who, spoiler, it turns out to be Glenn Shaddix's character, who's the like critic,
and
or
she
whatever.
thinks it's Rupert Everett's character,
right?
Yeah.
But so there's all this pressure. You got to make everything be good and fine for this whole crystal ball. We got somebody coming in to do this. Meanwhile, the kids were promised this like trip to Barbados of Jason Alexander's kids.
Classic. Dad's working too hard,
right, and then that's not going to
story.
happen. And so it's like you have to be on your best behavior during all this. Meanwhile, Rupert Everett's character is this like basically this con artist thief who uses monkeys to do his dirty work. Not to be confused with the Steely Dan song "Dirty Work," but do your dirty work. But well, that should have played at some point in this movie because the Portobello Road wasn't good enough.
Portobello Road,
but. So meanwhile, it's heavily implied that he killed the other monkey off screen.
I mean,
in the movie,
I don't know if it exactly says it, but it's clear that
it's
he.
Like, you know what happened to the other one, or whatever. That sounded like almost Peter Lorre or something. But so he's. So anyway, they're coming to basically rob everyone blind. But Dunston doesn't want to do it anymore.
He's an ape with a conscience,
right.
you know.
By the way, got to be the smartest animal performance in any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, it is really
genuinely impressive, I must say.
Yeah.
But anyway, the typical thing happens where Dunston and
we haven't said anything about the kid really much.
Yeah, so I mean they meet and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna take care of the monkey." He actually cares about the monkey.
Yeah.
And hijinks ensue. And basically it's about trying to keep quiet that there's a friggin' ape in the hotel. They have to bring in Paul Rubens' character, Pee Wee effing Herman, who
what was his name again?
Buck Lafarge.
What the hell?
Who is literally like a animal control specialist who like sucks at his job in every way.
Yeah, there's not one thing he does. It's like,
yeah.
If I was Faye Dunaway, I'd be like, "What am I paying you for? You've literally not done anything correct."
But
all the time.
And hijinks ensue, of course, and so the whole movie is ultimately about people trying to steal things, trying to keep quiet. There's a monkey. I mean, it's a very typical '90s children's.
I mean, I wrote down here on the outline just family animal comedy. I mean, we already did one of these with C Spot Run.
And I mean, you'd even had movies like this long before this. You'd had Lassie, far back. You'd had Rin Tin Tin. You'd had Old Yeller even. You'd had Any Which Way You Can, Any Which Way But Loose. All these movies that had done this whole thing about, you got the movie, you got the
and especially
animal,
the whole tradition of funny ape or funny
right.
monkey.
Oh, that's a whole thing. I mean, and you even had those horror movies of the 30s and 40s that were like, literally Bela Lugosi meets a Brooklyn gorilla or Boris Kaufman, whatever, all that. So yeah, there had been a long storied history of ape movies.
Now again, as you said, like,
and even just King Kong.
This is a legitimately impressive performance from, what was his name again? Sam
the orangutan as Dunston.
Yeah. So I think
also it's important to note that, because I went into the movie thinking, "Oh, is this based on some Dunston character?" Yeah. No, this is all made for the movie.
And I think even as a kid, my rudimentary understanding, I was even thinking like, "Oh, is this based on something, a comic strip or anything?"
Well, because that was so big in the '90s, because you had not only all the comic book adaptations like The Phantom, The Rocketeer, all that stuff, but then you also had Dennis the Menace. You had, all the TV adaptations of Addams Family.
And I do love the random confidence this movie.
Leave It to Beaver, which has the coffee cup climax that we cannot get over.
Yeah. One day we will maybe do that movie on here.
Yeah.
But again, I love the confidence Dunston checks in. Like,
Dunston.
I'm going to care instantly
he has
about
come
Dunston.
down from Portobello Road. And he's going to wreak hell and havoc. Like, yeah.
What about this movie appealed to you?
Everything. I mean, so I went into this movie thinking, "Oh, this is going to be total trash. I'm going to hate it." I came out of this double feature. This is my preferred movie. Now, believe me, I know that the Misfits is better. Like, I know that.
Yeah.
Okay. But this movie was so impressive to me in the fact that it just was the best that it could have been.
Yeah, it hit its
literally was just like, because Jason Alexander's pretty funny in it, and is actually a good lead.
To talk about him briefly, this had to have been done between various Seinfeld seasons.
Right.
We're huge fans of that. Love him. I mean, George Costanza is truly one of the
greatest TV characters, let alone the greatest. Definitely the greatest sitcom character ever, which is like easy to say.
This is, I mean, this isn't him in that. You imagine like a character kind of like a George, being that level of sycophant. I mean, that's not going to necessarily work as a father.
No, I mean he dials it back, but you can tell that there's all this like impotent rage that is like below this character at all times, because there's literally the whole sequence at the end where he fights Rupert Everett's character in the kitchen and goes full ham and just loses his GD'd mind, frankly, and so that's actually a kind of compelling performance.
Yeah, and again, I think this movie in general, which I had not seen in many years. I know a few years ago I happened to catch it on HBO in passing and going like, oh yeah, this movie. And I think literally us doing this now was a seed planted like all the way back years ago. Oh, we need to watch that. And I didn't know if you had seen it or not by then. This was the first time
So this was a big surprise to me, at least in the fact of, wow, this actually is kind of something.
Yeah, and again, I think to call it like I'd say this is like, not to overuse the word masterpiece, I think this is like a 2.5-star masterpiece. It exactly hits what it's going for. Again, because you're like, well, the best thing this could have been is 2.5. It's like, yeah, because this could have been way dumber even than it was, or way more pathetic. Well, if you see some of the other movies
that we've done that are like this, like The Country Bears, like
See Spot Run,
like
which we love too, but it's not even as good
Addams
as this.
Family Reunion, all these movies like this is by far the best because it's not based on anything. It doesn't have to like make itself something more than it is. It just simply is, and knows what it is, and isn't going for any big thing. And I think the cast is really good, so I think that's what makes it work.
I think Rupert Everett makes a legitimately great villain for what this is. I mean,
and just to even have Faye Dunaway in the movie,
that is kind of more throwaway, Dunaway, whatever way. But that it is kind of like, I'm a bigger fan of her than you are.
Yeah,
but just
I
like screen legend Faye Dunaway, who's been in like Bonnie and Clyde and Network and just some really amazing movies. And this happens to a lot of actors.
And would later inadvertently cause mass chaos at the Oscars.
She gets more flack from that than even my guy, Warren Beatty.
Because he's like,
more. He just kind of literally handed it over to her.
He's like, here comes Santa Claus.
Anyways, so she's late in her career here. I think, just to make this movie even more inappropriate, that she should have pursued a relationship with Jason Alexander's character, just to like up the ante of the level.
With the 8?
If we're going to get into that,
Never mind. Let's back out of that immediately.
But just like,
or even with Paul Rubens' character, that would have been something.
Yeah. Like this is reminiscent to me of like Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil in the 101 Dalmatians movie, except toned down obviously from that. But
or I'm going straight to the cops.
I'm going straight to the cops. What's that even from again?
It's from Addams Family.
Oh right, yeah. That movie.
Soaking wet in here. What are we even talking about?
Dunston checks in.
Yeah.
So hijinks ensue. Literally is one. So the plot of this movie, I mean, it's like, as we said, it's like, there's a lot of things going on. There's the father, son. We also talk a little bit about the older brother,
who has like the weirdest accent of all time. He's like,
he doesn't sound at all like Alexander or the younger brother.
He's very much like, I'm a Manhattanite,
he's like trying to flirt with women all the time and trying to
literally
get a girlfriend.
There's a scene where he's talking to like one of the security guards about, what do you think of that girl? And it's like, she's all right.
That's literally his one note.
Voyeurism. It's like, and even on the part of the adult in that situation.
I forgot about that. Yeah, the idea that they're like watching people on camera or whatever. It's like, this is weird.
And that guy's like at least 15 or 20 years older than that kid.
And he's indulging those fantasies.
Right.
Is weird.
Yeah.
But there's all the the boilerplate father-son stuff of like, Dad, you promised, and then like the mom had died or something. I think some off screen. I don't know.
Well, there was that whole part where he was like, think of something you really like. Don't do that. It's really because they're always like, you can't do this, can't do that. You're grounded from this, and but there's that. Then there's the
whole Rupert Everett Dunston stuff
and
of like
Dunston. Come down from there.
Come down from there.
It's like, Dunston, I'm really not in the mood.
I do feel like, weirdly, I don't know, if you get to the end of this movie and you remember the whole thing, I feel like there's not as many scenes with Dunston and Eric Lloyd's characters you would think there would be.
No.
That's like actually not as much of a... I mean, it's there, but it's like... It's not as active as you would think it would be, I mean... And, because, again, I mean... this movie pales in comparison to something like, say, like E.T., where it's like an animal or life form, almost as a pet with the kid kind of situation. And it, it obviously doesn't have that level of emotional intelligence or interest or style or anything. You literally go down the line, it would fail every metric compared to that. But there is like the monkey's cute, and we have a proclivity to think liking apes or monkeys in general. Obviously, we did friggin' 9 Planet of the Apes movies on this podcast in the past.
There's a cuteness to that.
There is a cuteness to that, and but also that like Dunston, like the personality of the quote character, if you want to call it that, of Dunston's interesting because it's like he's like kind of mischievous.
So I mean,
wants to cause trouble, but I'm not willing to do that. It's
I'll pull women's skirts up.
I might be a scamp, but I'm not going to do that. And as you said, like
he'll do anything for love, but he won't do that.
Yeah.
Isn't Meatloaf just an ape? Well, was, because,
Imagine Meatloaf as the Jason Alexander role. Like, or, just...
him screaming, "You pushed me too effing far!"
Then there's the whole hijinks again once Paul Rubin's character enters the fold of, like, trying to catch Dunston and everything,
Yeah. Well, now I'm just... Hang on. Now I'm just thinking of Meatloaf screaming and yelling at Faye Dunaway's character, "Okay!" And... half of those stars are mine. You mother... just...
Then there's the whole, like, Otho Shaddix being continually...
Glenn Shaddix.
I always call him Otho Shaddix. We don't even know what Otho's last name is in Beetlejuice, but we call him Shaddix because Glenn Shaddix is his real name. Him being just, like, constantly tortured and, like, belittled.
He's kind of like that character in Ocean's 13 who's, like, the critic in that.
Well, that made me think, like, wait a minute, like, is that ripping off this? And I don't know, Steven Soderbergh loves to watch all kinds of movies.
Well, like, that's a very common trope.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Of the critic who is like, oh, I'm actually the critic or whatever.
Or whether it's on, like, some vacation destination kind of thing, like on a cruise ship or in an exotic location, the, like, well-meaning buffoon or idiot who's constantly
I'm kind of
being
surprised.
belittled.
Now, this is kind of off topic, but I'm kind of surprised they didn't have a character like that in the werewolf episode of Kojak the Night Stalker,
which we recently been watching.
Because that's all on like a cruise ship, and it's like that's what that episode needed was like a critic or something in the midst of all that. That would have been interesting. But by the way, do you remember how like in that there's that character who's real annoying? He's like an Alex Rocco type who just literally gets murdered, and then nothing is really said about that anymore.
Right.
It's like he's real annoying the whole time, gets killed, and then they just move on. But anyway, but so that whole part of the movie is obvious and kind of ridiculous. But we kind of had that in our clip from last week of the Glenn Shaddix working out to that song, and it's just a Portobello Road, like, and
it's weird, like obviously him in Beetlejuice is so imprinted on us and our conception.
That's
of
one
him.
of the most impressive, I think, performances of a urban yuppie in another environment. Is literally like so. I think is actually maybe secretly the greatest performance of that movie, or the most thankless, because he has to be. I think that's such an interesting. I know we're just talking about, and we've talked about this movie already, but that whole character being just so like confident, but so inept in everything that he does.
I was going to say, even though he's inept in a certain way, and how his character concludes in the movie is a fascinating thing. But how he's kind of in control and has a confidence through most of it.
Right.
And then, so that's imprinted in our heads.
Like, he's an idiot that everyone thinks is a genius, so they give him all this runway to do whatever.
We've then spent years seeing him in other things, whether he's barely on Seinfeld also, or
was in
Demolition Man, and all these other roles. And it's like, a lot of it is more in this way. It's like either making him a punchline or... just like an even more pathetic.
Well, strangely, his whole career actually, what's actually really fascinating about someone like him too, and this can kind of be part of the backstory of the Otho characters. He's very prominently from Alabama, and also being a homosexual from Alabama. That's a big part of his whole, I guess, persona.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another, and he normally was played as that in all these other, as this Alabama eccentric.
Now, I'm not about to say anyone else could have played John Candy's role in JFK.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, he
imagine
could have been
him,
a Louisiana type.
Yeah.
I mean, because I remember him very prominently also in Carnival, which I never finished all of, was very much that type of thing, too, of like an Alabama eccentric in the 30s, like very much a part of that. So I feel like that's an inherent part of this, too, is this very like Southern high-class mentality. That, like I said, that's another, I think, inherent part to his performance in Beetlejuice is this, like, yuppie, but maybe not, actually. And he's, like, this kind of total, like, fabricated personality, almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that, I think, filters into this, too, is just this big question mark of what is this person exactly, and what do they want? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole part of the movie is very predictable, very obvious. Every single time he does something, it's interrupted by Bull S. Like, it's like even the ending of the movie kind of lightly implies that Jason Alexander will lose another job.
Well, yeah. So at the end, it's like, oh no, we're gonna finally give you we're gonna treat you right. And was it Jason Alexander? He gets transferred to where was it again?
It was like Bali, I think. Yeah,
and then they're finally getting that vacation, but it'll be a lifetime vacation, here, like living here, and
living in sin,
you've had a rough go of it. We're gonna see that you get treated right, and then the movie ends with like Dunston and his new family. By the way, Dunston's like procreated and had children with another orangutan. That. It's like he drops coconuts on his head or whatever. It's like,
and it's like you literally lose your job, Jason Alexander, or maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's like, what are they gonna do? Move forever? Like,
yeah.
What's next? Kinshasa?
This should have had this should have had a sequel. It should have been like Dunston goes skiing, or Dunston does this, or this could have really been a franchise.
Literally putting it in like a war zone, like Kinshasa or something. Like literally do
Dunston hits Bosnia.
Yeah. Dunston skates into Bosnia. I don't know. Yeah, and like there's all these scenes of like hastily buried dead and like and just like total genocidal fanaticism of the This
probably would have been a series, but it wasn't a box office bomb.
Like Yugoslav gets hit with a real slob, like
this slob hits Yugoslavia. But this movie like a bomb, I think.
By the way, for our Eastern European viewers, sorry to make light of your horrific recent past.
Yeah.
But anyway,
no offense. But this movie didn't make money. I don't know, right? Which is kind of shocking.
It lost about $6 million. It was made for $16 million. It made 10. So
you would think this would have done well. I mean, what I
don't know. I mean, and it was released January 12th of 1996. So I don't know. I mean,
celebrating the anniversary.
Yeah.
Let's see what was going on in the film world in 1996. Offhand, I'm having trouble thinking of some things. This is the top 10 box office grossers that year: Independence Day, Twister, Mission Impossible, The Rock, Hunchback of Notre Dame, 101 Dalmatians, Ransom, The Nutty Professor, Jerry Maguire, and Space Jam. If Space Jam can make money, why could this not have made money? I mean, I guess Space Jam obviously has Looney Tunes,
and Michael
I'm just
Jordan,
saying. I'm saying the quality of it.
I know. That movie's terrible.
Yeah,
I'll take a crap. I'll take a crap on that movie any day.
I mean, I understand why that made money, but I'm just saying,
It's funny. I was talking to some of my kids about Space Jam the other day in class, and I was like, "Let's make no illusions. Like, no, that movie's bad."
If you look at the events of 1996 in film, it says mid-July production begins on Titanic. Like,
okay,
they started making it then, but
sure, okay. Like
July 10th, Nickelodeon releases its first feature film, Harriet the Spy. A spy comedy drama based on 1960.
We talked about that a long time ago with Snow Day.
Switchblade
through. We need to combine that and Portobello Road into a remix.
Fargo also came out that year.
Yeah.
English Patient, People vs. Larry Flint.
Never forget the English Patient is a whole big part of Seinfeld, where it's like, oh man, the English Patient, there's a whole thing with Elaine. Anyway, Dunston checks in. When did he? What about Dunston Checks Out? Maybe that could have been a sequel where he gets assassinated or something. That's them dealing with the repercussions of that.
Oh, let's even look too. By the way, of movies that were released that weekend. So the week before, 12 Monkeys was released.
Okay, so it was a real banner month for monkeyisms there.
What a weekend this is here. All right, so January 12th, Biodome.
What?
With Pauly Shore.
Never heard of that.
Stoner comedy.
Okay. Biodome.
Stephen Baldwin's also in it. Rose McGowan. Anyways. Don't be a menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood.
Oh, is that a sequel to Don't Be a Menace?
Is it?
Or is that the first one?
I think that might be.
No, that's a
first
sequel, isn't it?
I don't think so.
Oh, that was the full title of the original movie. Okay. Because I've always seen it shortened as Don't Be a Menace.
Yeah. Dunston checks in. Yeah. Eye for an Eye, which is looks like a random thriller. Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace. Have you ever heard of that?
What?
Lawnmower Man 2 Beyond Cyberspace.
Okay, so the Lawnmower Man I know was an adaptation of that really bad Stephen King really bad Stephen King short story. I didn't know they made a sequel. I think that's literally one of the worst short stories randomly I've ever read. It's pretty bad.
Two If by Sea, a random romantic comedy.
Do you know what the Lawnmower Man is about?
Not really. Honestly.
Okay, so it's literally about like the Greek god Pan is like a lawnmower man eating grass in the backyard of a. It literally makes no sense. I'm not even making that up. Like. By the way, I want to talk about Don't Be a Menace to South Central while you're drinking your juice in the hood real quick.
Yeah.
So it says, similar to I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, which is one of my favorite. Supports a number of African-American coming-of-age hood films such as Juice, Jungle Fever, South Central, Do the Right Thing, New Jack City, Dead Presidents, and Friday, most prominently Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society.
Which we talked about a
But
while
it's
back.
like... But yeah, this is like supposed to be a comedy, though.
Oh, it's like funny, you know?
Yeah. I don't know how you could watch something like Menace to Society and be like, let's make that funny.
That's literally one of the most unfunny movies ever made. Yeah.
We'll talk about movie endings that are just like, wow. Like we were talking about Skinamarink earlier. That movie's ending is just like, wow.
It grabs you by the throat.
Yeah.
Speaking of inappropriate, this movie is wildly inappropriate.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you know, you can go back and watch a lot of kids' movies or comedy movies. I feel like, especially from the 90s, maybe that's because we're a little
because everybody talks about the 80s, about how the 80s with action movies was hyper violent and hyper
most of those movies were R-rated R, though.
Yes, but so the 90s, though, saw this weird trickle down. I mean, the trickle down theory worked.
Trickle down, economics.
The trickle down
Reagan's
theory
legacy
of inappropriateness in cinema made it down to those
Time
kids'
for
movies.
Bonzo is, you know, in some ways tied to this legacy, yeah.
But, it kind of trickled down to a lot of those movies in the 90s, very interestingly. I mean, I think the most inappropriate moment in this movie, and there are a lot of them, is literally the scene where Eric Lloyd goes to the bathroom, and Dunston is literally standing or in the air conditioning grate and is literally, like, trying to grab his, like, Spider-Man doll.
Right.
And he's, like, half asleep, pissing, and like and it's
all
weird. Really inappropriate.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it other than that.
Then there's an uninterrupted 30 seconds in the climax of the movie where Dunston is under the table and is like filling up and raises up the skirt of this random woman. I don't remember who it was exactly, who's sitting beside Glenn Shadix's character, and she thinks it's him. And she outrageously like smacks him in the face.
Which is impossible because he literally has both his hands above the table.
And
so,
and again, there's more to it than this, but like he's clearly a gay man. Like I don't know what else to say. Like I mean, immediately followed by Paul Rubens also under another table, looking for Dunston.
Do you want to just play the clip of that here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Can I help you with something, son?
I'm looking for a pongo pygmaeus.
I catch you looking at my wife's pongo pygmaeus once more, I'm gonna break you in half.
Right. Hi, how you doing?
Now, we had to film that off the TV, and you might have heard Kyle and I laughing a little bit.
But so there's a lot of things to break down here with this moment. I think the moment of the movie, I think this whole scene is really the movie at its height. So, like, the first thing Paul Rubens says is not, hello, my name is blank, blah, blah.
Right.
His first response is to look at this man and say, I'm looking for Pongo Pygmaeus.
Yeah.
And then the man, without missing a beat, as you heard in the clip, immediately says, if I catch you looking at my wife's Pongo Pygmaeus, you know, what does he say again? Like,
I'm gonna break you in half.
I'm gonna break you in half.
Yeah.
And then Paul Rubens like crawls away on his knees, like just kind of shuffling around, like, why can't you get up now and walk?
Now,
like,
my favorite moment in the whole clip is this music cue when he comes. You already heard it, but I'm gonna play it off my phone here. Just that, like,
it's like things are getting
like it's James
funky.
Bond.
Yeah.
It's like
Wow.
I don't know. There's a lot. Yeah, like I'm looking for Pongo Pygmaeus. Like what? And then the guy, like, if you look at my wife, Pongo Pygmaeus. Like,
and this is a chance for us to talk about this, and we've done this before. But like, humor in a lot of these lame, kids movies is a strange thing because it's clearly like there's a lot of the like low hanging fruit that's meant for the kids. But then, the idea is, you sneak enough things in for the adults to appreciate. But there's a point where, again, there's other inappropriate things in this movie where I'm like, this is a little... Why is this being aimed for kids? Like,
this isn't even inappropriate, but it's like that final moment where Glenn Shaddix is like, you will not be getting that sex star, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then he falls on her because he was, like, shot with a tranquilizer dart. And they both slam into the cake, and there's just something about that is extremely sensual. And like, I don't know. There's just something about that that's really weird. And like, I mean, there's a million other things in this movie. I said, literally, the fact that a kid is peeing and an ape is like right next to him, like fighting over a Spider-Man doll. There's just something really mentally bankrupt about that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What's the legacy of Dunston checks in for you?
It needs to be bigger, frankly. I mean, because there's a lot of these movies that are bad, obviously, and this one isn't that good. I mean, it's like we both gave it 2.5.
But an enthusiastic 2.5.
Yes, but it's like, I don't know. It's just very easy for me to like. And just no frills, just very much what it is, but very randomly effective in what it wants to be because it knows what it is and it doesn't. It's just like, okay.
I think hotels in general make for good settings for movies.
That and cruise ships.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think
anywhere that there's like a tourist angle going on.
Wasn't like Grand Hotel playing in one of the TVs or something in this too? Like at one point,
so, yeah.
That's obviously kind of the like a classic film that's of that nature. Right. Obviously, Grand Budapest Hotel, more recent thing. They just make for great like, this wacky character and this wacky character,
out of water comedy.
Yeah, just all these different people and things or whatever. How does this pair to you with the Misfits? What's the appeal of watching these two movies hypothetically back to back as a double feature?
I think, as you said, just to know how many different types of movies that there are.
Yeah.
Because
and just the inherent animal nature with which we live our lives and our attempts to try to tame animals themselves as a reflection of our own fallen either masculinity, maybe even femininity as well.
Yeah, I don't believe in any of that. I just like to watch movies. So
I go to see them movies.
Yes. I don't know.
So Dunston checks in. We watched. I ordered a DVD for this, and I'm glad I own that DVD. We want to talk briefly about. You didn't even see the whole thing, but I was watching there was a little featurette on the DVD that was talking about the making of the movie, and the whole time it really acted like Dunston was a fundamental collaborator, and he was such a diva and such a star and everything. So again, that's the sort of great things that only physical media can still bring to you, ladies and gentlemen. So check out Dunston Checks In and check out the Misfits, a pair of wacky movies. Some
wacky stuff.
So normally this is where Jeff Probst would prompt us to listen to some clips from the movies next week. But guess what? Next week's movies are both silent films, so there are no clips to be had, really.
Jeff, what do we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
Insert sound here. Man, I really love in that clip where it says insert sound here. It really makes me think about the absence of sound.
Right.
So we're doing some silent films. Help me with
Cabiria
from 1914 and Steamboat Bill Jr. from 1928. I think I speak for both of us when I say we really like silent films.
Yeah.
We've not seen as many as we would like to, but I don't remember the number, but I think I heard something like 90 to 95% of silent cinema is just lost. And obviously back then they didn't preserve movies nearly.
And you
what
think
they
about
do
all
now.
the ones that we have.
I mean, there's still tons
right.
around, and so you think about, wow, how many are lost. Now we've touched on silent cinema in the past here and there. We might have talked about, I don't remember if after we saw like some of those von Sternberg movies, The Last Command. I don't remember if we really talked about that on here or not. After
we
had
might have,
seen
I
it.
don't know, but I mean, we recently talked about it too with Babylon a little bit, and we've just in general, I think we talked about that also. We talked about the Universal monster movies, and we talked about Nosferatu and different.
So we're fans of silent cinema.
I thought we talked about Metropolis at some point.
We're fans of silent cinema. I'd still love to see more and more. And actually, Cabiria is not a movie I've seen. It came out in 1914. It's an Italian movie.
Yeah, I'll briefly describe what it's about since we both haven't seen it. It's an Italian epic silent film directed by Giovanni Pastroni, shot in Turin. It says, but yeah, it's basically during the Second Punic War, so it's kind of about Hannibal and that kind of Roman Republic era of Rome, and kind of it's very held up though. It says, according to Martin Scorsese, Pastroni invented the epic movie and deserves credit for many of the innovations often attributed to D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille. Among these was the extensive use of a moving camera, thus freeing the feature-length narrative film from static gaze. So I know it's also one of those movies that's a lot about these like pagan religious rituals and like all these different kind of things that were really in the ether at that time, of a lot like Intolerance. I feel like probably that would have been a big inspiration in certain ways for the Babylonian sections of Intolerance that Griffith made.
Yeah.
Also, this was the first movie to ever be shown at the White House at all.
Yeah. It's outdoors,
because it was shown outdoors.
Yeah,
so that's
during the Wilson presidency.
Right.
I know Birth of a Nation kind of, I think, had a lot of people say that about that. That was technically indoors.
Right.
It would be right around this time, anyways, about that time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a movie neither of us have seen. It is going to be fascinating. I really like. It's interesting that Scorsese credits that director with actually doing some of the things that sometimes people credit D.W. Griffith and other major, American filmmakers of that time with.
Yeah, and I think what's I always hear this movie talked about it's actually the way I first heard of it, about like historical epics or period pieces. This is like the first really big one that a lot of people talk about. Now, of course, you'd had tons of movies before that did that, and especially westerns like The Squaw Man or all these movies before that were these big westerns. But I feel like as far as this movie is the first to truly be like this big historical epic on the nature of, like we said, those D.W. Griffith movies, those Cecil B. DeMille movies,
and
not to be confused with Cecil B. Demented.
It's fascinating too, I think, to go into this scene, because again, I love Italian cinema, but I've not really seen anything pre-neorealism all that much. So it will be interesting to see an Italian cinema from a little bit of an earlier era.
Right.
Steamboat Bill Jr. is, of course, from Buster Keaton, who I think most people will know from The General if they've seen anything. He's part of that kind of those titans of silent film comedy. Of course, Charlie Chaplin I would put at the top of the list, but also Harold Lloyd. And so, I think The General is, among the greatest films ever made. I think that's his height. But Steamboat Bill Jr. is also, I think, really great. And, represents some pretty inventive, also, set pieces for that.
Yeah.
For you, what comes to mind when you think of not only Buster Keaton, but silent film comedy in general?
I find that to be obviously one of the most easily accessible for most people. Now, I'm really, of course, into those historical epics. I mean, really, my kind of stuff is the silent film comedy, the horror movie, or the science fiction movie, and then that. Dramas are always a little bit more. Not that they aren't great, but they're always a little bit more
They
a
fall
little
away
more
to the
pedantic, I think.
conventions to that time period more so than these other things do.
I think what allowed these movies to be more impressive was just by nature of their time period and them trying to make all these great special effects and all these new film techniques really came out of that because they had to manifest these fantastical events, and so therefore that's why those movies are honestly more remembered also, because they're not just static showing things happening.
Yeah, and I'd forgotten which movie it was, but it's actually in this Steamboat Bill Jr. that has the very famous stunt of the house falling and him, literally sitting there where the window is, and so and I think even more so than Chaplin, Keaton's movies had this real sense of physical danger and physical stunt work that he himself mostly did. I know too.
And I've seen more Chaplin than I have Buster Keaton, but I'm overall a little more of a Buster Keaton fan just based on the general and the cameraman.
Yeah,
which are both really good. But yeah, so I haven't seen this either.
Sherlock Holmes Jr. is also really great.
There's all these Junior. No.
I know it's more in vogue now to prefer Buster Keaton to Chaplin.
Yeah,
and because at the time when it was all going on, Chaplin.
And then there's Harold Lloyd.
Harold Lloyd's good, but is a very clear third. But I do like him though too. But Chaplin at the time was the height of everything. I mean, he was the one that everyone went to see his movies.
Yeah.
His movies also didn't come out every year like you might even think. That he actually, his career went along into the late 20s through the 30s. He actually took more time between movies and was such a perfectionist to the point of being, I think, kind of crazy, obviously, in that way.
Yeah.
But over the years, the decades, Keaton's star has kind of risen, and I think there's been more of this acknowledgement of him that was there in the 20s and 30s, but was a little maybe robbed of him.
Yeah.
I much prefer, in my own way, Chaplin still to Keaton, mostly because I feel like most of Chaplin's movies have more of a heart and more of a pathos to them than Keaton's do. Although I still love Keaton too. I mean, his work is fantastic, and I really love him too. And I picked this one specifically, and you picked Cabiria. And I think us picking these two, I think they're pretty different in their subject matters, obviously, but in their own way represent the spectrum of what silent cinema was in its own way. And again, Cabiria came out in 1914. That was obviously kind of in the midst of...
Even Proto Birth of a Nation, which was, 1915, and that gets all of the kind of credit. But like I say, Scorsese says and others say that Pastroni's own work had kind of presaged that in certain ways.
The Steamboat Bill Jr. kind of represents that last gasp of... silent film in its own way.
What year was that again?
1928. So that would have been Prost Jazz Singer. So that was, that was
practically contemporary to those early talkies at that point.
Right. Yeah. So, and I kind of picked that one specifically because I knew it was a later one, and also I really loved that one as well. It's crazy when you just look at the filmographies how many movies that are there for.
Yeah.
Grand Slam Opera
for educational pictures.
And then some movies he made with Columbia. That's later. That's in the 30s, so through the 40s.
He continued being in movies. Notably, he was in Sunset Boulevard, and of course later, also in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World at the very end, kind of that. So he continued to be in things. He kind of started looking like Eddie Constantine as he got older, I think.
Yeah.
Like a fish or something, almost. Yeah. College, there's a movie.
Yeah.
Hello, College.
Yeah. So that's this episode of Overlapping Dialogue. Again, tune in next episode. We're going to be talking about silent cinema. This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.